Introduction. Love is a serious mental disease. Plato, Love can be the most beautiful experience a human being has in their lifetime. True, genuine, requited love that's strong enough to shake the core of your being. It makes your heart race and your legs wobblier than usual. I'm talking about the kind of love where you find yourself dreamily gazing off into the horizon, brimming over with longing for the object of your desire. A love that makes you want to protect your partner from any threat that appears. Normally, it takes two people to produce this kind of infinite, larger-than-life adulation, but sometimes it's a different story. A few years ago, I wrote Surrounded by Psychopaths. Since its publication, I've had an astonishing number of people suggest to me that I should also write a book about narcissists. At first, the subject triggered no curiosity in me at all. This was mainly because of the close ties between narcissism and psychopathy. It felt difficult to add anything substantially novel or different to the subject. As time went on and I worked away on other projects, I began to notice a series of odd phenomena that are occurring in our society today. These were developments that honestly made very little sense to me. Found myself discussing a bunch of rather unusual questions with a whole crowd of people who had made similar observations themselves. Phenomena we hadn't observed before were becoming increasingly common right in front of our eyes. Meanwhile, the inquiries kept coming from various interested parties. When are you going to write a book about narcissism? In the end, this question was posed to me by somebody I couldn't say no to. You know who you are, and I began, somewhat unwillingly I might add, to research the subject. After some thorough investigations into the subject of narcissism, however, it dawned on me that I had stumbled across the explanation to a whole series of peculiarities that are making their way around the world. Narcissism, in the sense of the personality disorder defined by psychiatrists, takes its name from the character Narcissus from Greek mythology. This youth, who was famous for his beauty, was the son of the river god Cephissus. Narcissus was so incredibly handsome that anybody who saw him would immediately fall in love with him. The trouble was that he rejected everyone, including the young girl Echo, and was thus fated to fall in love with his own reflection. In one version of the myth, there are more competing versions out there than seems entirely necessary. Narcissus simply starves to death as he sits there by the pond, gazing at his reflection. Eventually, he transformed into a white and yellow flower, which has since been named after him. The Narcissus genus of flowers includes the daffodil. Whichever version of the myth we decide to believe, poor Narcissus was the first person ever, as far as we know, to fall victim to this powerful kind of self-love. But then again, being that he is a mythical figure, it seems likely that the problem was a familiar one even before the story was first told. Myths usually describe and explain things that people have already made note of. We've all come across them. The people who talk about themselves incessantly, announcing their incredible knowledge, skills, experience, and credentials to the world, who feel entitled to the best of whatever life has to offer, who feel better, more attractive, and more successful than their peers, who take selfies by the hundreds, painstakingly pore over them to single out the best one, and then fly into a violent rage if it doesn't receive as many likes as they feel it deserves. These are the people who go to great lengths to be trendy, who put great value in being seen, and who seem to be prepared to do almost anything to stand out. They get upset when the success they're expecting fails to materialize, and succumb to needy whining whenever things don't go their way. Perhaps you're thinking to yourself that people like this are nothing new. We used to just think to ourselves, what a jerk. Nowadays, people hardly even raise an eyebrow at this kind of thing. It's the new normal. Families accumulating massive debt just so they can keep up with the Joneses. Parents convincing their children that they can be anything they want because of how naturally fantastic they are. Influencers whose only real achievement is appearing in social media in trendy outfits. How long has it been this way? School kids who feel they don't need to study because they reckon they already know everything. Grade averages dropping in our schools, despite the constant dumbing down of the grading criteria. Families being run by members who have insufficient or no real-life experience. Teenagers choosing the family's holiday destination. Mothers buying their teenagers cars that cost more than the ones they drive themselves. University students who, rather than engaging with their ideological opponents in debate, form mobs to shout and cause enough ruckus to make sure that speakers they disapprove of won't be able to make themselves heard. Individuals who openly admit that they would do anything, literally anything, in order to be successful. Successful at what? 1. Wonders. Perhaps at participating in reality shows on TV, shows that feature aspects of human anatomy and behavior that would have been incredibly shocking just a few decades ago. What we think of as normal has taken on a very different face. The connections between the preceding descriptions and narcissism are as evident as they are disquieting. All of those descriptions include significant signs of narcissistic behavior. Sometimes, though, you need to take a few steps back to be able to detect the pattern. But as soon as you do, you see it as clear as day. Second, psychologists are more or less in agreement. Clinical narcissism occurs in somewhere between 1 and 2% of the population. However, there is no absolute consensus on the subject, and different researchers quote different sets of figures. Disagreement and argument over these issues is rife in the field. But for our purposes, 1 or 2% will be accurate enough. You might think that doesn't sound like too many. 1% is a very small ratio, like a tiny glitch in the system. But then again, that would mean that Sweden, my own country of residence, would be home to somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 narcissists. Applying the same percentage globally gives us a population of between 70 and 140 million narcissists. But there is a significant difference between the clinical term narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, and what we call narcissistic behavior. The latter is exhibited by people who display obvious narcissistic tendencies without having received a clinical diagnosis. Later in this book, I'll be giving you a series of examples of what I have come to refer to as narcissistic culture. This is when narcissistic behaviors become increasingly prevalent in various levels of society. One example of this would be an increased emphasis on the self. International research suggests that in Western culture, this is exhibited by closer to 10% of the population, maybe even more than that. Some have even suggested 15 to 20%. Just the thought of applying this percentage to the global population is enough to make me feel like I need to lie down. If we take a look at what clinical narcissism actually is, we'll soon find that among other characteristics, these individuals tend to entertain unrealistic self-images, indulge in self-obsession, consider themselves unique, speak only about themselves, deflect all criticism and negative feedback, feel that the rules don't apply to them, and basically strive for nothing but external rewards and social recognition. Everybody should get out of the way because here I come. Narcissists do genuinely strive for perfection, particularly in the eyes of others. They want everybody to view and think of them as the most beautiful, most intelligent, most informed, fittest, best dressed, wealthiest, most successful, and happiest people in the entire world. However, there is an obvious problem here. That goal is both irrational and completely unattainable. Basically, we can't expect any good to come of narcissism becoming more widespread in society. However, if we're to approach this issue in a more serious way, we'll need to figure out what's actually going on first. In addition, we have to give some thought to the practical consequences we all stand to suffer if we allow narcissism to run rampant. What I'm getting at here is that we need to be aware of the severity of the challenge. If you don't know which problem you're supposed to be solving, you won't even see any need for a solution. Once, long ago, there was no such thing as an SUV. Then one day SUVs became a thing. Some people bought them and reaped the benefits of a high, safe perch with a good view of traffic at the expense of everybody else's, and enjoyed the sense of security that came from knowing that they would be quite safe if they were to collide with an ordinary car. However, anybody who wasn't driving an SUV was suddenly in greater danger, because they were now at risk of colliding with one. The most significant cost related to the creation of SUVs was paid by all the other drivers, basically. More and more people bought SUVs. They wanted to feel safe and have that great view of the surrounding traffic too. But what were the consequences? Fuel consumption spiked. The planet's resources were more carelessly exploited than ever. Emissions increased. If everybody were to drive an SUV, many of the original benefits would simply be gone. It's like a trap, in a way. Narcissism functions very similarly. The behavior of a narcissist comes at a cost to others. Just like the invasion of the SUVs happened mainly at the expense of other drivers. Narcissists can maintain their sense of pride by lashing out at somebody who has somehow insulted them. Similarly, they can maintain their sense of personal fabulousness by taking credit for the achievements of their peers. They can cultivate a cool player image for themselves by dating countless potential mates who never even learn of one another's existence. Narcissists can go on feeling wonderful and amazing, while they make everyone around them suffer. Some people claim that there is a limit to how many self-infatuated narcissists we can cope with, collectively. That's an interesting thought. How much narcissism can society actually tolerate? Assuming the phenomenon really is becoming more common, that is. Third, of course, the question of how we ended up here is incredibly interesting, and it's unlikely that it can be answered simply. Some blame the internet and social media, while others point to the omnipresence of the message that we must all cultivate our self-esteem and be the best we can be. Social media companies were originally created by people who genuinely wanted to do good in the world and connect people to one another to help them share their lives online. Others suggest that this narcissistic strain has actually been there all along, and that what has changed is simply that we now have the tools to express it. Little mention is ever given to the fact that parents who encourage their little darlings to believe that they are princesses or world champions from the moment they are born, admittedly with the best of intentions, are inadvertently producing a sluggish armada of egomaniacal underachievers. Later in this book, I'll be sharing examples from schools in which comparisons were made between the performances of students with varying degrees of self-esteem. The results can only be described as interesting. Imagining that you're amazing and successful before your work has even begun is one approach, of course. Admittedly, too, we don't know for sure that people aren't striving to feel successful rather than actually be successful. What I will be reflecting on is whether we might actually have reached the point of diminishing returns when it comes to the benefits of egocentricity. At what point does good, healthy self-esteem turn into vanity and self-obsession and settle into a pattern of pathological egoism? Even those who only risk developing narcissistic traits rather than becoming full-on narcissists should take warning here. Although narcissists are invariably able to own a room, a conversation, or even an entire organization, they inevitably end up giving themselves away eventually. The people around them start to genuinely dislike them. If the narcissist doesn't abandon their overt self-centeredness, it will eventually trigger feelings of loathing in others. This is the very opposite of what the narcissist is actually trying to achieve, i.e., unwavering dedication. Fourth, before I move on to addressing the narcissistic culture we're seeing emerge, I'll describe and offer examples of NPD, which is a truly disturbed state. I also have a challenge for you and everyone else. Think very carefully about what we as a society ought to be striving to become. What kind of people do we want to be? Who do you want to be? What do you want to have control of your life and your personal growth? How would you like others to view you starting today? We could opt for the distinctively narcissistic path, which is paved with vanity, self-centeredness, superficial relationships, greed, social isolation, guilt, and chaos. Or we could choose another path, which leads us away from all those things. That approach is a pursuit of a far greater truth and freedom, but also the acceptance of a far-reaching sense of responsibility for ourselves, our families, our kids, and all the people we care the most about. However, this responsibility also extends to the society in which we live. This path is admittedly a more demanding one. But unlike the narcissist's approach, which is largely based on an illusion, it is genuine. Rather than some vain pursuit of a utopian idea of personal perfection, we can strive for a state of continuous improvement. While this is in a sense a journey with no real destination, it is at least an authentic one, which will allow you to remain truer to yourself. However, there is one requirement. We have to allow ourselves to pause and reflect on these things. We need to slam on the brakes here and reflect deeply on issues that could impact us for the rest of our lives. Thinking a little less about ourselves and a little more about one another is the road to true success and happiness. That's what this book is about. Part I. Narcissism, a brief introduction. 1. What is narcissism? We love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinions than our own. Marcus Aurelius. Narcissism, like psychopathy, has always existed. It is part of the species Homo sapiens. Just as there are quiet and loud people, early birds and night owls, cat people and dog people, and so on, there are narcissists. Evolution has produced the phenomenon of narcissism, and there probably isn't much point in our asking why. Perhaps it's all a cruel joke that our creator came up with back at the dawn of time. Check this out. I'm giving them an interesting challenge. Why don't I send them a human-shaped Trojan horse? Why not, indeed? As a species, the human race has struggled in the face of a bewildering variety of problems and disruptions. Narcissism is just one example among many. One thing that you'll have to bear in mind when it comes to narcissism is that it isn't a disease. It's not really an aspect of mental health as such. You can't treat it with Medicat or learn to live with it. Narcissism is a personality disorder. It's important to realize this so that you can immediately lay to rest any ideas you have of curing or treating the condition. I'll touch on the methods that tend to be used, but narcissism seems to be no more curable than color blindness, or the unfortunate affliction that causes some people to enjoy listening to the Rolling Stones. It is, as they say, what it is. Wikipedia says, narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, or megalomania is a personality disorder characterized by a long-term pattern of exaggerated feelings of self-importance, an excessive craving for admiration, and struggles with empathy. The Mayo Clinic offers this description of narcissistic personality disorder: a mental condition in which people have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, and a lack of empathy for others. Just like many other diagnoses, this one is frequently used rather imprecisely in everyday conversation. Sometimes all it takes for somebody to be labeled the office narcissist is that they tend to get a little carried away when they talk about themselves. Self-centered people can certainly be irritating, and it's definitely one of the signs of narcissism, but it isn't the only one. Common characteristics of narcissism: unrealistic, grandiose self-image, incredibly self-centered, speak only about themselves, feeling special and unique, arrogance and haughtiness, quick to criticize and judge others, highly sensitive to criticism, think the rules don't apply to them, constant self-promotion, feeling entitled to the best of everything, value, power and fame demand, constant acknowledgement, will respond with aggression when questioned, deceitful and manipulative. All these separate points can be broken down into smaller components, and studying the various points in depth is worthwhile, as it can often help you find the explanation for what might otherwise have remained just a feeling. I'm sure you've met people who would be diagnosed as narcissists, even if you never knew it at the time. You've probably thought things like, "This feels odd," or "Why is this conversation making me uncomfortable? Is there something wrong with me?" Perhaps this description will help clear these things up for you. In addition, if you've been incorrectly told that somebody is a narcissist, this chapter will give you the tools you need to figure it out. You'll learn to detect the PA turns, even if you're not a qualified psychologist. An in-depth look at each characteristic. If we take a brief look at each characteristic, we'll soon see that they all actually fit together rather well. Some of them even overlap without being identical. Unrealistic self-image. This is sometimes called a grandiose self-image. Having an unrealistic self-image is exactly what you'd expect. It involves having a self-image that doesn't match up with reality. Unrealistic seems to be open to two different interpretations, however. Wouldn't a highly successful individual who felt like an utter failure also have an unrealistic self-image? All realistic means in this context is that it matches up well with reality, after all. In this case, though, I'm only discussing the inverse relationship. People who overestimate their achievements so that even those who are moderate failures might see themselves as true winners. One particular kind of narcissist, who, unlike other narcissists, actually often end up seeking help, partly because of the depressions they suffer and partly for the recognition it affords them, tends to think of themselves as failures. However, they make a point of pointing out that their failure is the direct result of their unfair treatment at the hands of the world, and that their talents would surely have set them apart from the masses if it hadn't been for that. They're usually jealous of other people and often suspect that their successes must have been achieved by nefarious means, rather than genuine talent or merit, like those of the narcissist. Narcissists' unrealistic self-images will often hinge on their failure to acknowledge their own limitations. They take jobs they aren't qualified for, and then experience genuine surprise at how challenging they find them. They get involved in discussions about subjects they know next to nothing about, and then have a difficult time accepting it when their ignorance is exposed and they lose the argument. Incredibly self-centered. Merriam-Webster's online dictionary defines self-centeredness as self-sufficiency on the one hand, and being concerned solely with one's own desires, needs, or interests on the other. The former has nothing to do with narcissism. On the contrary, narcissists tend to be utterly dependent on others for satisfying their psychological needs. Narcissists essentially think only about themselves, their own experiences, their preferences, and their needs. Other people? Well, they do exist, certainly, but mainly to be exploited by the narcissist for their own benefit. Basically, everything else orbits the narcissist. Their view of the world is the only one that matters, and everyone else had better adjust. Anything that happens in the vicinity of a narcissist will be judged based on their own opinions. If they see an angle that might allow them to benefit from a situation, that's a positive, even if it has negative consequences for 10 other people. If it's bad for the narcissist but good for 100 others, it's a bad thing overall. Speak only about themselves. Any conversation will inevitably end up being about the narcissist. The topic doesn't really matter much. Nothing comes more naturally to narcissists than inserting themselves into everything. That's what interests them the most, after all. Narcissists want to be involved in every story and announce their experience of something or other. Since other people aren't too interesting, it only makes sense to change the subject to something more exciting. And if a narcissist should fail to make the particular subject of conversation about them, they will simply change the subject to make it more directly about them. I'm sure you know the old joke, that's enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? Feeling special and unique. Narcissists feel that they are highly unique and genuinely special. Naturally, every human being is unique in their own way, but to a narcissist, what this means is that they genuinely possess abilities that almost nobody else has. They have different, better talents than everyone else. They look better, are smarter, or are more successful. These are individuals who think of themselves as God's gift to humanity. They consider themselves to be fully and completely fabulous, and if anybody claims otherwise, there will be trouble. On top of this, people who tend towards narcissism will often imagine that people appreciate or even love them to a very great extent. They seriously believe that they are highly popular among many people, perhaps more popular than anybody else. But the truth is that they are more likely to be popular with a particular group of people and far less so in other circles. Narcissists believe themselves to be on top of the world even when everyone else can see they aren't even close. Quick to criticize and judge others. Since a narcissist is already the best at everything and shares this fact freely with anyone they meet, they also know that everyone else is far worse at everything. They don't mind sharing this fact either, often in a rather judgmental fashion. Since a narcissist feels entitled to think and say whatever they want to, they often do just that. And as a result of their obvious contempt for everyone else, they can't help but put people down. Basically, putting others down makes narcissists feel better because it makes them feel more important, like winners, more or less. Since narcissists tend to exhibit arrogance and haughtiness in their behavior and attitudes, there are only a few people whom they will be prepared to spend their time and attention on. The little people aren't really worthy of their attention. A narcissist who possesses developed social skills can cause tremendous harm to unwitting victims. An example of this is the tremendous increase we've seen in hate speech online in recent years. Attacking people you don't like for some reason or another is a particular specialty of narcissists. It doesn't matter if the victim is guilty or innocent. Since narcissists are unhindered by moral laws, believe they are entitled to do what they want, and feel that putting others down somehow elevates them. They're prepared to spend huge amounts of time picking people apart. Sometimes they're basically just bullies, highly sensitive to criticism. Some people are quick to criticize because they prefer an open and frank conversation, but when it comes to narcissists, this is always a one-way street. They feel entitled to criticize and tear down others, but they are far too sensitive to be prepared to listen to what people think of them, since they will invariably take any criticism As a sign that the world around them is failing to perceive their greatness, they will react quickly, often with forceful, sudden rage. And along with that, a thirst for vengeance. Criticism can be interpreted in a variety of ways. On the one hand, it could be genuine criticism, that is, a negative assessment of the narcissist's performance, for example. However, it could also be a case of insufficient praise or not cheering loud enough about how wonderful their achievements are. If what you give the narcissist fails to live up to their expectations, they can erupt at any moment. Think the rules don't apply to them. The previous point frequently results in the following. Because narcissists think of themselves as incredibly special and unique, an interesting effect occurs. The rules and regulations that the rest of society has agreed on don't apply to them. It could be anything from sticking to the speed limit to taking responsibility at work. If you genuinely believe that the ordinary rules of society don't apply to you, that will set you apart. Making an effort to be nice and acting polite and welcoming are within a narcissist's repertoire, of course. But since they feel no genuine compulsion to conform to these norms, they are able to drop the pretense with surprising speed if provoked. This is one of the reasons why other people seldom have any genuine appreciation for narcissists. They can certainly attract a coterie of admirers to orbit them, but nobody genuinely likes them. Their lack of respect for the rules makes them too unpredictable. Most people find this exhausting in the long run. Narcissist relationships are actually much more superficial than they may realize. Constant self-promotion. The first word of every sentence is I. I think, I feel, I believe, I wish, I want, I demand. Because narcissists think of themselves as the best at everything, they will always emphasize their own qualities. They are also bound to inform everybody about their popularity, important acquaintances, and unrivaled network. This is a variant of the grandiose self-image, and it can produce an odd effect when a narcissist keeps emphasizing their contributions to the world. This goes beyond simply talking about yourself too. Narcissists might well donate money to charities. They just won't do it unless they can somehow tell the rest of the world that they did it. The reason for this is very simple. They want to receive credit for their huge hearts. Donating $100 to save the children isn't enough for them. To ensure that they will receive the ovations they deserve from their imagined fans, they have to post about it on Instagram and Facebook. Alarmingly enough, narcissists are overrepresented within the hierarchies of global charities, such as Save the Children or UNICEF. They do the minimum amount of work required of them, but make a point of trying to climb the rungs of the organization at the expense of colleagues who have actually dedicated their lives to charity work. Yes, this has been studied too. Feeling entitled to the best of everything. Narcissists feel entitled to the best the world has to offer. This is an important drive for them, a constant striving for perfection and need to have the very best. Just like a little child imagines that they can get away with doing anything they feel like, narcissists do the same because they feel entitled to it. Claiming space, insulting or stepping on others, receiving maximal compensation for minimal effort, narcissists feel naturally entitled to all that stuff. In addition, it's also their essential birthright to live in the most elegant house in the best neighborhood, drive the most expensive car, and wear only the finest clothes. The list goes on. Whenever a narcissist wants something, this feeling hinges on the sense that they are entitled to it. No further arguments are necessary. However illogical this may sound, it seems perfectly rational to them. And since they prefer their rewards to be instant, they won't hesitate to take a shortcut. Value power and fame. Power and fame are highly valued attributes in the eyes of a narcissist. They are evidence of the narcissist's worth, which is something everybody should be acknowledging. Attention matters. Amusingly enough, narcissists don't insist that the attention they receive be positive. Negative attention is better than no attention at all. In this regard, narcissists are just like little children. The consequence of this is that narcissists, like psychopaths, are drawn to any place in which power and attention tend to concentrate. However, problems will soon arise if people fail to acknowledge narcissists' importance. They may even exhibit signs of mild depression if they don't receive the attention they crave. Demand constant acknowledgement. Many people work hard and enjoy basking in the recognition they receive from the world for the successes they achieve. But that's it for them. The acceptance they've been given actually satisfies them. Not so for narcissists. These people live for constant recognition, and since they believe themselves to be entitled to it, they are always looking to get more too. This could be an employee who always runs errands for the boss in exchange for praise. But it could also be a boss who keeps buying the team cake in order to hear how popular they are. Narcissists' need for recognition requires constant refilling, and this can seem incomprehensible to the people around them. How could anybody need to be told how handsome, well-dressed, skilled, successful, and popular they are every single day, deceitful and manipulative? Narcissists are often highly efficient when it comes to detecting people's weaknesses. They also tend to be prepared to exploit these weaknesses to deceive and defraud their victims. Exploiting others comes naturally to them. They are often indifferent to the emotions of others, which makes them skilled at manipulating the people around them. Since they are reasonably indifferent to the danger of being exposed, they will take risks and behave with such boldness that it can often be difficult to believe that they are being deceitful. What conclusions can we draw so far? These are the basic features of narcissism. There are psychological tools we can use to measure these characteristics quite accurately, and I will be discussing one of these later on. If you score high enough for each area, you might actually be a narcissist in the clinical sense. However, the diagnosis can only be made by qualified experts who specialize in this particular area. Not just any psychologist is qualified to do this, because many within the field believe that narcissism and even psychopathy are treatable conditions. They are approaching the whole problem from the wrong direction, basically. Plenty of ordinary people exhibit distinct narcissistic traits without ever being diagnosed. There is no doubt either that our society promotes and rewards these kinds of behavior. I'm going to take a closer look at some of these behaviors and identify the risks involved. I'll also be looking into whether there might be any benefits to being a narcissist. 2. Being a cut above the rest. Always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everyone else. Margaret Mead, are you unique? I'd have to say you are, because evidently all human beings are given a unique blueprint by nature. Every human being has their own unique DNA sequence. In each living individual, the DNA strands are different. Large portions of them will actually be identical, but let's not delve too deep into the scientific considerations here. In any case, all that is just a small part of what makes you a unique being. There's plenty more unique stuff to be found if you examine other factors too. Your personality is probably nearly unique, if not fully. It's actually less than obvious what parts of an individual's personality we can consider unique. How unique can somebody get exactly? If we consider your sex, you'll differ from close to half the population based on that alone. Your age? Only a tiny minority of people are exactly your age. How many people on the planet have the exact same education as you? Your same background and income? Do you adhere to any particular faith? What are your opinions on climate change? What political camp are you in? Are you married, single, cohabiting? Do you have children? Why is that? No kids, eh? How come? What about your hobbies and interests? What kind of food do you like? And what dishes do you hate? How tall are you? Are you good at your job? How much of your workday is actually spent doing productive work? Would you say you're a reliable person who practically always keeps your promises? Are you organized or messy? What about your temper? On a scale from 1 to 23 million, where 23 million is the most advanced computer in the world and 1 is practically dead, how quickly do you make decisions? Are you an early bird or a night owl? If someone holds a gun to your head and asks you to choose between cats and dogs, which is it? If we were to make a list of every single factor that might have an impact on a particular individual's personality, we'd soon realize that there's far more than just your DNA to set you apart from the other 7 billion of us. It's often suggested that we ought to focus on our similarities rather than on our differences. While I understand the intentions behind this comment, I also think that it's based on a misunderstanding of the whole point of emphasizing uniqueness. Considering all the differences between us that I've just been discussing, pretending that we're all the same is more than a little naive. Being unique and incredibly special, we've arrived at an interesting conclusion. Claiming to be unique seems like it would be a waste of time in a world where everybody else is unique too. If we're all unique, the word itself seems to lose all meaning. Unique means one of a kind. There's nothing special about that. But okay, let's agree to emphasize how unique we are and avoid evaluating any differences we might observe in others. The challenge lies in accepting our differences without judgment. Suggesting that one of them might be better or worse than another seems problematic to me. Perhaps you're beginning to wonder where I'm going with all of this. Defining yourself as unique simply means that you're claiming nobody else is exactly like you. However, defining yourself as special is a whole different matter. To claim to be special is to suggest that you possess something specific that most other people do not. It means you're a cut above the rest. You're not simply unique, you possess some special ability or gift or spirit, which we're about to highlight. You're special, amazing, wonderful, and you can do anything you want by virtue of being you. I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but statistically, chances are you're not particularly special. Only a very small minority of the people on this planet are actually special. This is precisely where narcissists have found their angle. The dangers of being special. Perhaps that's not the right heading. Sometimes there is no risk at all in being truly special. I don't just mean unique. I mean having something in you that can create value for millions of people on this planet. There have been many people like that. Isaac Newton, Mother Teresa, Albert Einstein, Nelson Mandela, Marie Curie, Michelle Obama, Bill Gates, William, Shakespeare, Beyoncé. Being special is a good thing, of course. On one condition, that is, you have to be genuinely special. Let's be honest. Most of us have no obvious, unrivaled hero-level talents. I know for certain that I'm not naturally gifted at any single discipline I can think of right now. There are things I'm not too bad at. I'd even say I'm pretty good at some things, but none of it came naturally to me. I've had to learn every skill I have. This is where we notice a bit of a problem. Although I haven't met a large number of remarkably special people in my lifetime, I've met a few truly exceptional individuals. You know the type, the kind of person you wish you could be like, but who also makes you painfully aware that you'll never measure up to them in any way. However, I've met plenty of people who acted like they were special. The main danger of being special, I think, is that it's something others want to be. Special, as in possessing qualities that set them apart from others. They are better than the rest of us somehow. Special, then, basically means better. So, how do you get to be special? The answer to this probably lies hidden deep within the concept of heredity, underneath countless layers of incredibly complex assumptions about how certain individuals are obviously born with traits that almost nobody else shares with them. We know that we become the individuals we are through an interplay of nature and nurture. The precise mechanics of this are still being debated by the world's leading experts in biology, psychology, and a few adjacent fields. I'm in no way claiming to have a grasp of anything beyond the fundamentals of this. But I do know something else. Simply telling yourself that you're special won't actually make you special. You also won't become special as a result of somebody else claiming that you are. If your mother told you that you're truly special, it might be a good idea to ask her what exactly she meant. Perhaps 99.9% of us will have to face the fact that while we may be unique, we are in no way special. Maybe that's not a problem. If you're not a narcissist, it probably won't be. But if you are, you'll find the very idea unthinkable. 3. The rest of the dark triad. Hell is empty and all the devils are here. William Shakespeare. Narcissism isn't the only troubling personality disorder around. There are actually other, even more serious variants of this less than charming disposition. The dark triad is a disquieting set of 3 major personality disorders that can each make an individual pose a threat to other people. There are no clear boundaries between these 3 disorders, and they have some characteristics in common. Self-centeredness and a grandiose self-image combined with manipulative behavior towards others are the common denominators here. These 3 personality disorders make up the dark triad: psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism. In discussing these disorders, I've left the realm of annoying but essentially harmless behavior well and truly behind. This is no longer a matter of little ego boosts, but of dangerous pathological behavior that can pose a threat to anybody who encounters it. These individuals are bad company, sometimes even dangerous company. Unfortunately, misconceptions about these disorders abound, and there are all kinds of ideas about the meanings of these concepts in circulation on social media and the rest of the internet. Sometimes it all seems to blend into a jumble of concepts, so I'd like to clear up some of the differences between, say, psychopathy and narcissism, because although they are connected, they are not the same thing. Psychopathy. Since I dedicated an entire book to psychopaths a few years ago, I'll limit myself to a brief account here. A psychopath is a person who looks like you, and who often speaks and generally behaves much like you. But deep down, they are actually nothing like you. Under the surface, there is stuff going on that you could never even imagine. Psychopaths are one of the most troubling influences on our society. They have no inhibitions when it comes to trying to reach their goals. If somebody is in their way, they will stop at nothing to get past them. Psychopaths can hide among us, in plain sight, but they always give themselves away in the end. When they do, it's usually too late. They can be extremely manipulative and can convince almost anybody of almost anything. And yes, that includes you and me. They have a knack for identifying other people's weaknesses and exploiting them for their own personal benefit. There are several competing checklists in use as measures of psychopathy, but the following one is the most common. It was developed by Robert Hare, a psychologist who has spent decades researching psychopathy. Robert Hare's psychopathy checklist, revised PCL 2016 RANDS. 1. Glib and superficial charm. 2. Grandiose, exaggerated estimation of self. Lack of remorse or guilt. Callousness and lack of empathy. Cunning and manipulativeness. Shallow affect superficial emotional responsiveness. Impulsivity. 8. Poor behavioral controls. 9. Need for stimulation. 10. Irresponsibility. 11. Early behavior problems. 12. Antisocial behavior as an adult. 13. Pathological lying. 14. Parasitic lifestyle. 15. Sexual promiscuity. 16. Lack of realistic long-term goals. 17. Failure to accept responsibility for own actions. 18. Juvenile delinquency. 19. Breaking parole. 20. Criminal versatility. This checklist will, in theory, produce a score ranging from 0, not even you or I would score this low, we've all lied for example, to a maximum of 40 points. Each of the mentioned behaviors is examined, and the frequency with which it is exhibited is assessed. If it's almost never, the score is 0 points. If it's occasional, that's 1 point, and if it's a regular occurrence, you score 2 points. If a large enough number of these behaviors is exhibited with sufficient frequency, an individual can be given the diagnosis of psychopathy. However, this requires a clinical assessment by qualified personnel and can't be done in a single quick session. Observing patterns can require time, particularly since many of the more intelligent psychopaths learn how to blend in with the crowd. What is the required score for a diagnosis of psychopathy? That depends slightly on where in the world you live. For example, Great Britain has set a limit of 25 points. In the United States, they draw the line at 30 points. Why is this? I honestly don't know. I've not been able to identify the different motives involved in the creation of these standards. Basically, they made different judgment calls. Although the requirements for psychopathy are more stringent in the USA, it is still said that the ratio of psychopaths to the general population is higher there than in Europe. I haven't found any data to explain the reasons for this either. However, people should tread carefully even when with anyone whose score is around 15 points. A score that high spells trouble. Generally speaking, we could say that a psychopath is everything a narcissist is plus more. A psychopath is prepared to do anything to achieve their goals. Breaking the law means nothing to them. They rarely consider the consequences. Of course, they prefer to live in freedom, but regardless of the risks, they are going to go ahead and do whatever they feel like. They tend to have difficulties with impulse control, and this frequently causes them problems. The systems that regulate their emotions are mute, which means that they never experience fear, stress, anxiety, empathy, love, or any other of the emotions that the rest of us tangle with on a daily basis. Using other people causes them no more discomfort than ordering dinner at their local restaurant. Lying is nothing to them. They could be pulled over by the police with a body in the trunk of their car without the slightest elevation of their heart rate. Less intelligent psychopaths are often incarcerated. The criminal justice system in Sweden estimates that 25% of all prisoners in the country are clinical psychopaths. That alone is a good reason for anybody to stay well clear of prisons. For smarter psychopaths, it's a very different story. Other popular data suggests that 10% of all people in upper managerial positions are psychopaths. This goes for all kinds of organizations, from drug cartels to religious movements. It's hard to verify this data, but it's obvious that the higher up in an organizational hierarchy you look, the greater the ratio of psychopaths will be. The reason for this is simple. Psychopaths crave power and attention. They believe that they belong at the top of the food chain, and that makes it only natural for them to seek to rise in the ranks. As is usually the case, they will utilize any acceptable means, and a few more besides, to get what they want. Opinions vary on how large a percentage of the overall population can be categorized as psychopaths. In Sweden, where I live, psychologists usually claim that it is about 1%. I've discussed this with many of them, but nobody has been able to explain what this estimation is based on. Quite a lot of research is being done in this field globally, and worldwide the ratio is often said to be 2 to 4%. The challenging thing about psychopaths is more or less the same as the challenging thing about cats. They can't be studied because they refuse to participate in studies. Psychopathy can't be cured. It can't be treated. Therapy doesn't work. In fact, it only makes them worse because it teaches them more about how people function. It adds new weapons to their arsenals. It's estimated that about 50% of the psychopathy trait is hereditary. There are more male psychopaths than female ones. Psychopathic behavior tends to make its initial appearance in the early teens, but it can also be evident earlier. If you want to learn more about psychopathy, there are quite a lot of books on the topic, in addition to my own, Surrounded by Psychopaths. Machiavellianism. You hardly ever hear about this disorder, and maybe that's for the best. Machiavellianism is the second leg of the triad, and a person who exhibits it will be so focused on their own interests that they will manipulate, lie, and exploit others to achieve their goals. This is a genuinely unnerving behavioral pattern, which is largely reminiscent of psychopathy, but may actually even seem worse on a closer look. Some people claim that Machiavellianism should be treated as a part of the psychopathy spectrum, but others feel that this disorder is distinct enough to merit a separate classification. While narcissists just can't help but put themselves center stage, and psychopaths can't help scamming the people they encounter, individuals with Machiavellianism are always in full control of their actions. The term Machiavellianism is derived from the infamous Niccolò Machiavelli, an Italian Renaissance diplomat and philosopher whose most famous achievement was his book, The Prince. This notorious work proposed that strong rulers ought to treat their subjects and enemies with severity, and that honor and survival could legitimize any means, including those otherwise thought amoral or excessively brutal. At the close of the 16th century, Machiavellianism became a popular term used to denote the art of using deception to further your ambitions. It didn't become a psychological term until the 1970s. Machiavellianism, like psychopathy, has proven to be more prevalent among men than among women. It can occur in anybody, though, including children. Machiavellians usually exhibit the following behaviors: focus only on their own ambitions and interests, prioritize power and money over relationships, exploit and manipulate others to get ahead, frequently use flattery, lack principles and values, are hard to truly get to know, exhibit cynicism, a lack of appreciation for goodness, or morals are evasive in terms of commitment and emotional. Relationships are capable of great patience as a result of their calculating. Natures seldom reveal their true intentions. Have frequent new sexual encounters, are good at decoding social situations, and other people lack warmth in social interactions. This disorder is easily conflated with psychopathy, but there are several important distinctions between the two. The most significant of these has to do with the difficulties psychopaths experience in resisting their impulses. They see something they want, and they act more or less immediately to make it theirs. Psychopaths are always looking to manipulate and deceive others. largely because of the excitement they experience from seeing how far they can push things. Machiavellians, on the other hand, are always in full control of their actions. They might be incredibly generous to certain people and absolutely ruthless to others. They know exactly what they're doing, and they are highly skilled at keeping their plans under wraps. Psychopaths will always expose their true nature eventually, but a Machiavellian personality disorder can take many years to detect. Machiavellianism is ultimately focused on one's own well-being. Individuals who exhibit these traits believe that they need to be deceptive and manipulative to get anywhere in life. They don't trust in human kindness, and they find it frightfully naive to place faith in others. They prioritize power over love or connections with others. For some reason, there is almost no literature at all on Machiavellianism. For a good overview of the background, I recommend you read Machiavelli's own The Prince. Each part of the dark triad, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, and narcissism, can pose complex challenges to the people who encounter it. Psychopathy mostly involves being cold, unempathic, and insensitive to the needs of others. Machiavellianism mostly involves manipulating people for personal gain. Narcissism mostly involves feeling deserving of praise and special treatment that others don't receive. Somebody who exhibits all three of these disorders will pose a genuine danger to the mental well-being of other people. Now, imagine somebody like that who also happens to lack inhibitions when it comes to violence. Could that be the definition of pure evil, perhaps? Despite the seemingly obvious connections between the three parts of the dark triad and the existence of a trait that usually occurs in conjunction with the other two, researchers have yet to discover clear evidence of a true correlation. 4. Is it normal to think about yourself all the time? More the knowledge, lesser the ego. Lesser the knowledge, more the ego. Albert Einstein. Thinking about yourself isn't a very strange thing to do. It comes naturally to us, and we were probably all designed that way from the start. Some behavioral scientists claim that 95% of our thoughts are about ourselves, or about events related to ourselves. I've tried to test this and see if it's correct, but despite being prepared to accept the logic of the claim, I haven't been able to log the contents of my thoughts with much accuracy. However, there's a difference between focusing on yourself on the one hand and focusing on yourself at the expense of everyone else on the other. Most of the people we encounter are ultimately loyal to themselves, but they reflect on and factor in the effects their decisions will have on others in their deliberations. Since we live in a world where nobody can succeed entirely on their own, we have to take other people into consideration. We don't have to like it, but on an intellectual level, we need to grasp that this is the way things are and adapt accordingly. To simplify things, you could say that this is what separates a civilized person from, say, a narcissist. We all have that innate drive to focus on ourselves and treat ourselves as the number one priority. A narcissist does precisely this, without any hesitation. The rest of us regulate our urges and conform to the requirements of whatever circumstances we're in. Although the instinct to put yourself first will always be there, various processes within us ensure that we factor the interests of others into our decisions. We don't want to embarrass ourselves. We don't want to hurt anybody. We also don't want to hurt ourselves by giving ourselves a guilty conscience for no good reason. We deal in long-term consequences. What will everyone else think if I just grab as much cake as I want, without worrying about how many of us are supposed to be sharing it? Maybe nobody will say anything. That's how conflict-averse people are in this department. But I might find it difficult to win support from my coworkers in other situations if I've made everybody think I'm selfish. How will Roger fare if I fudge the truth about his mistakes a little, when the boss asks me about what happened? What if I exaggerated his errors a little, to make myself look better in comparison? Do I really want to make a complete fool of Roger over a single little mistake he made? Perhaps what I should really be doing is offering to help him clean up the mess he's made. If I lie to my wife about what I did last Thursday, I'll gain short-term relief from having to deal with her reaction if she were to discover the truth. But when she does figure out where I was, her rage will be all the fiercer for it. Not to mention the guilty conscience I'll have to carry around until then. All these considerations, which all of us make from time to time, are entirely normal. We weigh the short-term gain against the long-term risk. Sometimes we make the right choice. Narcissists don't function anything like this. They simply go ahead and do whatever they feel like in the moment and wager on the short-term rewards of amoral behavior. They do this despite realizing that others might be sad, hurt, angered, or otherwise negatively affected as a result of their decision. It matters little to them. They are entitled to behave amorally, as it happens. It's somewhere in this vicinity that we make the transition from normal behavior to something very different. Using other people as stepping stones to your own ends should be considered an aberration. The basics of human behavior according to the DISC theory. If you've read any of my other books, you'll no doubt be aware that we will at some point be discussing the DISC dominance, influence, steadiness, compliance system of behavior analysis, and the 4 colors associated with it: red, yellow, green, and blue. This book is no exception to that rule. Now, although the DISC model is not required in order to explain narcissism, it can still be helpful to remind ourselves about our own natural behavior. The DISC method can help explain some of the reactions you may experience while reading. It can even make it easier to sift out stuff that's actually quite normal, however incomprehensible it might seem, and allow us to better focus on the topic at hand: narcissism. I use the well-established DISC model to explain variations in behavioral patterns. There are countless other methods out there, but this model covers most of what you need to know at this juncture. If you prefer to use the 5-factor model or Myers-Briggs, that's also a useful tool. I'll stick with this one though, because it's the one I know best. There are many things that might influence how a person functions, countless in fact, and I'm going to be discussing 2 of these next: a person's behavioral profile and their level of personal growth. I should mention at this point that this system is based on the analysis of subjective reports, and that it is thus not intended to give a comprehensive account of the inner workings of human beings. However, it can provide a basic insight into our most common reactions. So, here is a brief introduction. If you feel you're an expert at the 4 colors by now, feel free to skip this section, but my advice is that you check it out either way. Repetition, as they say, is the mother of learning. Let's go. Reds, who are fact-oriented and extroverted, are driven to solve problems and take on difficult challenges. The more demanding a task is, the better. If something works better than expected, their suspicion is aroused. What's the catch here? Why is this so easy? It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. No pain, no gain. Sometimes more pain is better than less. Pain makes you stronger. They like a quick pace, plenty of action, and wild times. If reds are all about action, then yellows, who are relationship-oriented extroverts, are all about interaction. These are the people who can't resist trying to convince everybody else about the validity of their own thoughts and opinions. They can't leave the room until consensus has been reached. They are optimists, able to see a glimmer of sunshine in the most violent of rainstorms. Yellows, too, enjoy a quick pace. Greens, who are relationship-oriented and introverted, are change-averse to the core. A lot of green in a personality profile signals the person will have no interest in changing anything. Change is viewed with suspicion, even when it is entirely and obviously necessary. These are the people who talk about the good old days, who say you know what you've got but not what you'll get, or that the grass is never greener on the other side. Any new idea is immediately dismissed in favor of the status quo. Thank you very much. Finally, blues, who are introverted and fact-oriented, enjoy rules and regulations. They are sticklers for protocol and always know what the correct procedure is. These people read the assembly manual before they even unpack their new IKEA shelves. Ideally, they read it in 3 different languages. These 4 attitudes, along with the differences between introversion and extroversion, or between being fact or people-oriented, give rise to certain behaviors. What are these behaviors more specifically? If we look at what these behavior profiles lead to, we'll start to see obvious differences in all sorts of contexts. Following this section is a list of different specific attributes that are correlated with different colors. At this point, I should tell you that there are exceptions to these rules. There are always exceptions. Understanding people is a complex challenge. However, each characteristic is specific to the color in question. It also feels important to add that we all have some of all the colors in us. We are all able to behave in a variety of ways, but there are definite behavioral patterns that each of us will be more or less comfortable with and that we will display to the world around us. Statistically, the most common pattern, which accounts for about 80% of the population, is a combination of two colors. Common combinations include red-yellow, yellow-green, green-blue, and blue-red. Less common are yellow-blue and red-green. We don't know what causes this distribution. Around 15% of the population exhibit three colors, making them even more difficult to interpret. And a mere 5% of the population stick to a single color. These statistics were taken from a sample of about 50 million respondents from all over the world, an attempt at a scale of self-centeredness. Narcissism is largely a matter of self-centeredness, but this doesn't mean that everybody who is self-centered is a narcissist. As usual in the field of psychology, it's hard to draw sharp distinctions here. If I were to try to design a scale for a concept as multifaceted as self-centeredness, it would probably be something along the following lines. All people take the greatest interest in themselves and in their own needs. This is just human nature. The same is true of most animals we know about. Most individuals would be prepared to fight for their own survival. Some people don't display much of this side of themselves. That doesn't mean it's absent. It only indicates that they've learned to suppress the less attractive aspects of their nature. When it comes to the introverts, the greens and blues generally seem calmer and quieter, and they recover more energy when they don't need to interact with too many people. They're quite content to be their own sources of recognition, rather than seeking it from others. They don't talk much, unless they're very comfortable with the company they're in. Being the center of attention in public situations is not their favorite thing in the world. They prefer to stand to one side, observing or watching. Preservation is more important than change. Introverts will often be fully content to spend time inside their own minds. In terms of the disc theory, this makes them green and blue. They're less noisy, and other people tend not to perceive them as particularly self-centered, although of course they still belong to the overall category of human beings in general. Next, we have their opposites, the extroverts, who enjoy action, bustle, and for things to be happening. Fast-paced situations energize them, and they move around in the world at a much quicker pace than introverts do. They don't mind being the center of attention one bit. Some of them would even say they enjoy it. Any change is like a burst of fresh air, and they like it when things unfold quickly. The old days are over and gone. According to the disc theory, again, these individuals are red and yellow. While reds do have rather large, powerful egos, ego is Greek for self, they don't always care what everybody else thinks about them because they aren't relationship-oriented. They can definitely be self-centered, but usually not in any of the more annoying ways. They simply have a way of pointing out how they happen to be right and everyone else is wrong. The behavior of yellows is perceived as particularly attention-seeking. If you're at a dinner or party of some kind, look for crowds. More often than not, you'll find yellows at the center of them. They'll be telling jokes or amusing anecdotes, or just being entertaining in general. They are good at making whatever they say sound interesting and important, and they have a natural knack for holding other people's attention. In other words, they are professional-level speakers. Many of us have fallen for charming yellows and their well-communicated visions. It's not necessarily a case of having great social skills, but it's definitely a social activity. Yellows love attention and are unusually receptive to positive feedback. They will happily lap up any praise, recognition, or acknowledgement that comes their way, while making a big show of saying it was really nothing. Many yellows you encounter will be prepared to go to some lengths to entertain their fellow human beings. Sometimes it can feel like everyone is part of an audience in their mind. This can cause them to take up more space than is strictly necessary, which can attract some ire. Why don't you let someone else get a word in, dude? Much of this behavior actually happens subconsciously. Yellows tend not to have more than a vague idea that they are being loud. They probably don't mean to claim every molecule of oxygen in the room. It just happens. They simply act on their natural instinct, which is to open their mouths and see what happens next. This will not uncommonly end up resulting in another few sentences, starting with I. Although a fair number of people, particularly greens and blues, can get quite irritated at yellows and their behavior, I'd still say that most yellows are actually fairly harmless. There's nothing evil about them. They simply lack self-awareness. So when somebody eventually, inevitably, shouts at them, "Will you never stop talking?" the yellow will respond with genuine surprise. What just happened? I thought we were having such a nice time. One of the biggest fears a yellow knows is that of being ostracized. Being denied the acceptance of your peers and ejected from the group is a terrible form of punishment. Yellows feel that judging them solely on the basis of their less charming traits would be unfair. They can also get a little indignant when they notice that the people around them aren't responding well to their childish antics. Sometimes they can even get upset. Tempers have been known to flare. Fortunately, they are just as quick to forget all about being angry, and the sun is bound to be back out again soon. If there's any color that's more often accused of being narcissistic than the others, I'd wager it's the yellows. However, that's not the kind of narcissism I'm discussing here. Now, what happens if we shift our gaze from yellow behavior and instead take a look at something we'd have to agree is less normal? Is it possible to be even more self-centered than a yellow without being a clinical narcissist? Histrionic personality disorder. Beyond the yellow, moderately annoying self-obsession, we enter the territory of a concept that is little discussed: histrionic personality disorder, or HPD. This is characterized by a pattern of excessive attention-seeking, uninhibited and seductive behavior, and an exaggerated desire to be accepted. People who have been diagnosed with HPD are often described as lively, dramatic, animated, enthusiastic, and flirtatious. Women are diagnosed with HPD about 4 times as often as men. Why? Because it's true? Because of bias from psychologists? Who could say? HPD is nested within a cluster of more dramatic personality disorders. People with HPD are very keen on attention and often make loud, occasionally even inappropriate, comments. Their behavior can often seem rather exaggerated, and they crave constant stimulation. They can be sexually provocative and express powerful emotions. Anything they need to make a strong impression on the people they encounter. They can be highly egotistical and can sometimes be deeply manipulative in seeking to satisfy their own needs. Individuals with HPD tend to be quite highly functioning in both social and professional terms. They will usually possess average social skills, which they will at times put to use to manipulate people and ensure they will be the center of attention. However, HPD can also have consequences for social and close relationships, which will be further exacerbated by these people's inability to process defeat or failure. HPD. Individuals won't always have realistic views of their own situation and tend instead to overdramatize and exaggerate their everyday challenges. They change jobs often because they are quick to grow bored. Their strong preference for thrills and excitement can get them into some sticky situations if they aren't permitted to live the slightly crazy life they want or deny the adulation of an audience. They could even develop depression. There is a useful mnemonic that can help you learn the basics about HPD. Provocative behavior relationships are considered more intimate than they actually are. Attention-seeking influenced easily by others or circumstances. Speech style wants to impress. Lacks detail, emotional ability, shallowness. Makeup, physical appearance is used to draw attention to self. Exaggerated emotions, theatrical. Praise me. It's simple, but I like it. But how does the transition from regular to moderately excessive self-centeredness to pathological self-infatuation happen? To put it bluntly, do we succumb to narcissism as a result of getting too much of a good thing? 5. A first encounter with Linda. We are each our own devil, and we make this world our own hell. Oscar Wilde. Please let me introduce you to a fictional person, Linda. In this book, I'll use her as an aid to illustrate how narcissistic behavior will often express itself in real life. An example of everyday narcissism. Linda's 22nd birthday was in 2020. She is a business student in college. She feels that she's worked hard, but her teachers don't think she's done everything that could be expected of her. They consider her performance average. Linda has a very large social circle. She's constantly interacting with an endless supply of attractive, smiling people on social media. She publishes at least one post every day, often more than that. Her posts offer a wealth of information on how amazingly exciting her days and nights are. You could say she has lots of superficial relationships, but only 1 or 2 genuine close friends. This is actually quite strange considering her open attitude, good looks, upbringing in a nice family in a good neighborhood, passable people skills, seeming popularity, and promising prospects. She lives in a small apartment that's fairly centrally located in a medium-sized Swedish town. Her parents bought the apartment for her because she didn't want to have to get up so early in the morning to make it to her lectures on time. After complaining loudly and repeatedly about this to her parents, with increasingly obvious insinuations that they would do something about it if they still cared about her, they reluctantly opened their wallets. The apartment cost almost as much as the suburban house her parents live in. While Linda studies, her mother, who also has a part-time job, cleans her apartment and even does Linda's dirty laundry for her. Her mother has tried to get out of this arrangement on a couple of occasions, suggesting gently that an adult ought to be able to take care of their own laundry. Each time, Linda broke down in the face of the pressure of having to study and keep a home all at once. Her mother has never dared to ask Linda how many hours she spends studying each day. She hasn't shown them any exam results. Truth be told, she doesn't spend that many hours on schoolwork. Actually studying for an exam would restrict Linda's social life far too much. Linda's studies aren't as interesting as she had hoped they would be, so she spends more of her time partying or hanging out online. She isn't unintelligent or poorly educated. She has every opportunity to succeed, really. The reason why she won't apply herself to her studies isn't entirely clear. Her own explanation is that life can't be all work. You need to make some time for yourself, too. Grow into your future self. Feel things out. Since she considers it her inviolable right to receive a passing grade, she isn't even that concerned. Other students pass the exams, so why shouldn't she? It actually looks like she should be able to graduate if she does a couple of repeat exams in core subjects. Before she enrolled in the business program, she took a year off to travel. Now she feels like she needs another year off after having to deal with all this pressure for the last 4 years. So, she goes to her parents and asks them to fund her lifestyle for another few years, since she can't quite decide what to dedicate the rest of her life to. Maybe she'll look for work in a field related to her studies, or maybe she'll go back to school for a while. She'll have to see how things play out. She's young, and she's in no rush to make her mind up. Those things always work themselves out in the end. So, what's the problem here, really? Okay, Linda is a bit spoiled. Her parents are perhaps too generous with their time and money. On the other hand, as a parent, you love your kids even after they've grown up. Of course, you would do anything to help them get off the ground in their lives. What parent wouldn't? The problem is Linda's methods for getting all the things she currently has. To get an apartment in the city, which is worth as much as her parents' house. She manipulated them by threatening to commit suicide if they didn't do what she asked. To coax her mother into cleaning for her and doing her laundry, she cried, screamed, and complained that her mother didn't love her anymore. To ensure she'll be able to graduate despite her lackluster performance, Linda has accused one of her professors of discriminatory treatment. This scared him straight in a hurry, and he soon gave her a passing grade. To secure a supply of new clothes and pretty shoes, not to mention enough makeup to keep an opera production up and running. She's made a point of bringing her dad to heel. He never could say no to her. Even when her monthly clothing budget is greater than his own yearly one, he keeps shelling out. None of this is obvious on the surface. These are simply the methods that Linda has found to be particularly effective for getting her way. Neither of her parents has ever really pushed back. Since Linda genuinely feels entitled to all these privileges, she can't see anything wrong with the way she's behaved. She's going to get the things she needs to have a good life, and nobody is going to stop her. However, there are a number of clues here. For somebody who only has 1 or 2 real friends but many superficial acquaintances, Linda has done a good job of stabbing people she doesn't like in the back. If somebody criticized her, she paid them back threefold. If somebody failed to give her the attention she felt she was due, she would slander the person in question and spread malicious rumors about them. Social media is a wonderful tool for spreading lies about people who have failed to be sufficiently respectful or fawning. Maybe you're thinking to yourself that this all sounds like sheer idiocy. You're not all wrong in that case. It is idiocy. But the question you should ask yourself as you read on is this. If it were up to you, would you classify Linda as a very strong-willed, yellow-haired person, as somebody with HPD, or as a narcissist? Part 2, Narcissism. An in-depth look. 6. Surveying the depths of complex souls. There is always some madness in love, but there is also some reason in madness. Friedrich Nietzsche. Apart from wanting the same things as everyone else, i.e., a good life that progresses as smoothly as possible. Narcissists specifically want certain things that the rest of us might not be prepared to accept. What do narcissists want? Deep down, what narcissists want is control. They prefer to be in the driver's seat because it makes them feel better. Better than what? Everybody else, basically. Anything that can produce this feeling of superiority or brilliance will seem desirable to a narcissist. Anything that can make them feel like they are the center of attention will be hugely important to them. Anything that allows them to live in a fantasy world in which everything genuinely revolves around them is worth striving for. They want things that will make them feel like they come first. They even actively enjoy being favored over others, regardless of the context. A child with narcissistic tendencies will have no time for any concept of justice that also considers the rights of their siblings. Arguments to the effect that a certain arrangement would be unfair to the narcissist's brother are a total waste of air. Narcissistic children don't want justice for anybody but themselves. When they can't have more of something or the better something or all of something, this is all deeply unfair. It's not enough just to get a lot. A narcissist wants reassurance that what they are getting really is more. They need to see and be convinced that they are being given more respect and admiration than the next person. If the people around them fail to signal how important they are in comparison with everybody else, this speaks to some fundamental flaw in those people. This means then that if your partner is a narcissist, you can't simply say, "Gosh, don't you look handsome?" Just to be safe, you should probably add this: compared to everybody I have ever met. Power, as I mentioned earlier, is another important component. This could be power over yourself, over others, over a situation, over an encounter, or over the decisions that are being made. Another word for this is control, appreciation, or rather, admiration. The greater the number of people bowing or applauding, the better. However, I should also mention sympathy. Many narcissists are very good at playing the victim, since this is a surefire way to gain a lot of sympathy. Sympathy also happens to be synonymous with attention. If you think about it, you'll find that lots of people are currently defining themselves or the group they belong to as victims. I have a hunch that narcissism might be the culprit here, too. More on this later, though. Compassion is disturbing to most people. If other people feel compassion for you, that just goes to prove that you must be in a miserable state. However, for a narcissist, it fits in perfectly with the overall pattern: prestige and status. An elevated position within their social hierarchy is definitely something most narcissists crave. They want it not just for the power that comes with it, but rather for the attention, admiration, and maybe even fear it brings. Influence can be associated with power. A narcissist wants to feel that they exert some degree of influence over the events and people in their life. Service is another important ingredient for narcissists. This could mean anything from being particularly pampered in a restaurant to having a significant other who magics away all the boring household chores. We could actually just as well call this category servitude, not having to spend. Time on depressing household chores makes a narcissist feel particularly important, appreciation, and praise. Of course, there's simply no way you could ever praise a narcissist enough. They will lap it all up, including any obvious exaggerations or lies in their favor, and then gesture at you to keep it coming. There's more? Really? Okay, bring it on. Submission. Others must obey and ideally surrender all their agency in the face of the greatness of the narcissist. This suits the narcissist perfectly, as it gives them absolute power to play with us as though we were pieces on a chessboard. Absolute loyalty is the end result. Everyone simply must obey. Nobody gets to talk back. More submissive individuals who think of themselves as followers are more likely to be enthralled by narcissists. It's not always too clear what interest a narcissist takes in these things, though. They are good at concealing their true selves because they realize that their need for public adulation would not always be perceived as a sympathetic trait by the public. How do you satisfy a narcissist? It's also worth noting at this point that even if a narcissist were to be given all the things I listed earlier, they still wouldn't be happy. They will always harbor some suspicion that they might have been cheated out of something they're actually entitled to. Even if they were to receive everything the world has to offer, they would still experience discomfort or even anger, rather than satisfaction over what they had. Once you've come to know a narcissist and learn to detect this pattern, you'll soon find that there really is no pleasing them. Anybody who has ever felt a lump of anxiety in their throat over giving their partner the best, most expensive, and most thoughtful gift ever deserves to know where that lump came from. Often, its source will be earlier birthdays, when despite their best efforts to get a good gift, they ended up being told that so-and-so actually has a slightly better one of these and how life is. Very unfair, actually. The reason for this unappealing reaction is not simply that the person in question is childish, it also reflects the truth that expensive gifts are not viewed as the fulfillment of some deep wish. They are better viewed as reparations for perceived injustices. Things were supposed to have been this way all along, so it's about time this was remedied. Anyone seeing a child snort indifferently before tossing incredibly expensive gifts aside at Christmas or on a birthday is bound to think to themselves that the child in question is insufferably rude. But this could also be a case of narcissistic tendencies that shouldn't be encouraged. The same behavior would be absolutely intolerable in an adult. It's got nothing to do with the actual gifts themselves. Humble or expensive, it doesn't matter. You could wrap up a Bentley or a ring fitted with the biggest diamond in the world and hand it over to a narcissist. They would simply place it in their pile of swag with everything else. There would be no sign at all of any genuine gratitude. There's simply no way to satisfy a narcissist. Even King Midas himself could never produce enough gold to get a genuine narcissist to shut up. They usually feel unfairly treated by life because their wishes never come true. This often leads them on to a series of unfortunate behaviors, such as bossing people around and making others work even harder in their futile attempts to satisfy the narcissist. 7. Do I love myself? It's complicated. No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. Carl Jung. Narcissus fell in love with himself, and this ultimately became his downfall. But that's just a Greek myth, right? Falling in love with yourself surely can't be a problem. Things must be far worse for all the people who don't appreciate themselves at all, right? A significant portion of the population has truly terrible self-esteem. These people can barely stand their own company, and if anybody offers them a word of praise, they soon dismiss it and point out that they are actually completely useless. One way of ending up like that is to fall victim to a psychopath. Psychopaths have a particular knack for tearing people down, piece by piece. Psychopath survivors frequently end up going through a full-on life crisis, and often go on to struggle with shattered illusions and post-traumatic stress disorder. These individuals badly need to find a way to accept themselves again. They could also be the grown-up children of addicts, who often have to live with the memories of decades of physical and psychological abuse. Their entire lives were organized around the needs of their substance-addicted mother or their violent dad, to the point where they hardly know who they are. They might have spent their entire childhoods hiding in corners, not knowing when the next slap would come. Teaching an individual like this the value of self-love is absolutely vital. They'll be starting out from a place of abject self-loathing, and I know from experience how difficult it can be to make somebody like that even attain the most basic degree of self-acceptance. This is where love yourself is actually an important message. Lots of people in the self-help industry do this kind of thing, often with impressive effects, loving yourself. But what about people who already love themselves from the start? What happens if we keep telling them that they should commit fully and go all in on self-esteem? This is a tricky subject, I'm the first to admit that. It's probably impossible to draw a clear line between healthy self-appreciation and self-esteem, and unsympathetic, self-promoting egotism, or narcissism for that matter. But that line must be somewhere. The media, as usual, is having fun frightening everyone. Sometimes it seems like young people are feeling worse than ever. It's certainly true that many young people have difficulties processing the things they experience on social media. Once upon a time, the only people you had to worry about were your classmates at school. Now it's the whole world. It's not easy to always be comparing yourself to the best of the best. We're also seeing alarming reports of an increase in suicide attempts among young people because of online bullying. Those bullies aren't appearing out of thin air, but where do they come from? It might be helpful for you to know that young people today are more satisfied with themselves than their grandparents were. There is a clear difference between these generations. Extensive psychological studies have shown that there is a clear correlation between one's age and one's self-esteem. This is a significant difference, too. In an American study, From a few years ago, it was found that self-esteem among college students had increased by more than 80% between the 1960s and the 2010s. In primary school children, the increase was 93% over the last 50 years. Those are impressive numbers. Who could possibly find anything objectionable about that? During a study of the mothers of 3-year-olds, the mothers were asked if they felt that it was important for their children to have a strong self-esteem. Naturally, all the mothers wanted their kids to have good self-esteem. The grandmothers were asked the same question too. They too felt that strong self-esteem was preferable to weak self-esteem. When the mothers were asked if a child could have too much self-esteem, they all agreed that they couldn't. The interesting thing was what happened when the grandmothers were asked this question. They were in agreement too. Only they claimed that you can absolutely get too much of a good thing in this case. According to them, excessive self-esteem could easily be mistaken for arrogance, self-centeredness, and entitlement. This study was an American one, so if you live elsewhere, it may not say too much about the place where you live. Naturally, there are some cultural differences between the United States and, say, my own country of Sweden. However, I also know that anything that catches on in America is bound to make its way here over the next 5 to 10 years or so. By the way, the study I just mentioned was from 2010. At this point, I should note that some people feel strongly that we're actually seeing the opposite development. Young people are increasingly struggling with mental health, they claim. The truth is probably that well-being varies between different groups. Large swaths of society are feeling better than ever, while a portion of young people are having a difficult time. On the other hand, things have probably always been this way. Google's take on how to love yourself. At this point, you might be thinking to yourself that this means the necessary changes have already been made. Perhaps things, for some unknown reason, were nudged just far enough, in just the right direction. Maybe the youth of the world are finally enjoying a comfortable state of healthy self-respect and self-esteem, all correctly calibrated and tuned. Maybe we're not in danger of causing an outbreak of narcissistic behavior after all. Well, a few months ago, I read a book about a different subject in which it was stated that a Google search of the string, "How to Love Yourself," would get 191,000 hits. That's quite impressive. The authors were amazed at how many hits it got. I took a look at the inside cover. The book was published in 2013. Okay. Just for fun, I ran my own search for How to Love Yourself while I was writing this in the winter of 2020-21. Are you sitting down? Number of hits, 2,450,000,000. Almost 2.5 billion hits on the question of how to learn to love yourself. That only makes sense though. There are plenty of titles in the literature that claim that if you can just love yourself, your problems will be solved. If you start out with this one thing, there's no limit to what you might achieve when you like yourself more than you should. Self-admiration is perhaps not an unexpected side effect of having strong self-esteem. They are tightly connected to each other, although the latter is positive while the former is not. We should like ourselves, certainly, but self-admiration frequently produces negative effects, the danger of being viewed as a narcissist and all the harmful behavior associated with this is just one of these. Narcissism is a psychological term, but that doesn't mean you need a psychology degree to be able to recognize the signs: arrogance, hedonism, vanity, self-promotion, grandiosity, and self-centeredness. Narcissists are completely preoccupied with themselves, think mostly about themselves, and adore the sound of their own voices. A great number of egotistical jerks are narcissists, but there are also superficially charming and charismatic individuals who clearly present narcissistic traits. The boundary isn't perfectly defined here. The trait they have in common is their excessively positive self-images. These people go beyond confidence. They are self-obsessed and smug. They are firmly convinced that they are not only unique, but also very, very special. There's nobody else like them in the world. However, all of this comes with a special challenge. You see, narcissists are faced with the dramatic psychological paradox. How do you maintain your sense that you're special and important when you're not really too different from anybody else? One way, of course, might be to find some partners in crime to further inflate your dangerously oversized ego. If you manage to convince yourself and everybody else that you're actually as great as you think you are, you really could be a winner. However, all you'd be winning at is self-admiration. So, does this mean that strong self-esteem is the same thing as narcissism? No, of course not. And I hope I've been clear on this so far. Narcissism and self-esteem differ in a number of important ways. People with strong self-esteem definitely have a positive self-image. That's the whole point, after all. But they are also able to think of the bigger picture. They don't only consider their own benefit, and because they feel so secure in themselves, they don't mind helping others. They think of themselves as moral agents and strive to make ethical decisions. Narcissists think highly of themselves, but spend most of their time bragging about their abilities. They don't promote themselves for being thoughtful or friendly or humble. No, they think of themselves as winners, and they announce this to anybody who is prepared to listen. They don't even try to hide the fact that they think they are the best. Why should they? Sometimes you hear of sore losers, people who get into arguments because they hate to lose so badly. Did you know there are sore winners too? I knew a guy like that once. If he ever won anything, it could be a game of ping pong, a round of Trivial Pursuit, or just getting to the front of the restroom line at the local bar. He would taunt his opponent with a victory dance and be generally rude to them. He had entirely missed the whole sportsmanship ethos. And, as you might expect, he soon became the target of some rather serious criticism. People really hated that guy. Aha! So it's people with weak self-esteem who become narcissists? Well, there is a fairly popular idea that narcissists actually hate themselves and that just looking in the mirror fills them with dread. Their behavior is actually all a ruse designed to hide this fact. Underneath the surface, deep down inside, they're terribly insecure. We've all heard this more times than we care to recall. Back when I was in school, they were already suggesting to us that the big bad bullies in the schoolyard, who didn't mind kicking or punching somebody if the teachers weren't looking, were actually very insecure deep down. That annoyed me then, and it still annoys me now. Why is that guy harassing me if he's so insecure? I was as insecure as anyone, but I never picked on other kids. Everybody was insecure, come to think of it, so how was that idea even supposed to work? Some psychologists call this behavior masking. The idea is that we're supposed to believe that while the narcissist is standing before us, giggling smugly, full of self-importance, it's all really a cry for help. Poor thing. But it's all hidden away, as I said. This is probably too generous and an oversimplification. The vast majority of people who have endured difficult childhoods and major life trauma don't end up spending their time making everybody else's lives difficult. Certainly, some people do struggle with their past. There are, without any doubt, individuals who feel genuinely insecure, but they aren't the ones I'm talking about. The people I'm talking about are the ones who exhibit narcissistic characteristics. Years ago, I used to work for a large company. We had a guy in my department who got up to some pretty strange stuff. To put it bluntly, he was a blatant bully. Rather than transfer him, or even remove him from the company entirely, the HR department decided to offer him therapy. His victims were asked to overlook his slights, or if they couldn't do that, it was suggested they might seek employment elsewhere. The bully might be going through a difficult time. A revealing study of real-world narcissists. Narcissists are commonly divided into two subcategories. Grandiose narcissists are the extroverted types we all recognize. But there is also a smaller group, which is referred to as vulnerable narcissists. These are the ones who have poor self-esteem and who don't attract as much attention. There is no evidence that grandiose narcissists, the variety this book mainly deals with, are actually insecure underneath the surface. On the contrary, there are lots of studies that show that adults who score highly for narcissism also tend to score highly for self-esteem. In fact, these individuals tend to be more content with themselves than the general population. The same is true of sociopaths and psychopaths, who often think very highly of themselves. The statements in the questionnaires used are usually along these lines. I feel that I possess some value, at least as much as other people, and I feel that I possess a number of good qualities. If you feel entitled to the best of what life has to offer, you won't find much to argue with there. To a true narcissist, these statements would actually seem too vague. You bet I possess some value, more than most people actually, and I don't just have a number of good qualities, I have all of them. Researchers have devised fairly accurate tools for measuring this. One system, IAT Implicit Association Test, is based on the idea that you respond me, not me, in relation to a sequence of positive and negative words. Among other things, the tool considers how quickly you respond to certain questions, an indicator of how convinced you are of your response. People who have good self-esteem tend to associate themselves with words like good or wonderful. However, they associate themselves less with words like awful or wrong. Researchers have used this method to find out how narcissists really feel deep down inside. The results speak volumes. It turns out that deep inside, the majority of all narcissists feel anything but miserable. On the contrary, they find themselves to be completely exceptional. It's much easier than for non-narcissists. That is, for narcissists to select words like good, wonderful, great, brilliant, and right as descriptors for themselves. They find it equally easy to distance themselves from words like bad, terrible, awful, and wrong. If we simplified things slightly, we could refer to this as explicit self-esteem. However, implicit self-esteem can also be measured. Narcissists perform better even for words like assertive, active, energetic, outspoken, dominant, and enthusiastic, rather than quiet, reserved, withdrawn, submissive, and inhibited. However, when it comes to terms like kind, friendly, generous, cooperative, pleasant, and affectionate, rather than mean, rude, stingy, quarrelsome, grouchy, and cruel, they mess up. Narcissists don't score anywhere near as highly here. How should we interpret this? Narcissists have a highly cohesive self-image, on the surface as well as at any depth we choose to look at. We could go as deep as we like. They are the same, all the way through. Narcissists think of themselves as natural winners, but caring about others isn't anywhere near their list of priorities. The difference is glaringly obvious here. Non-narcissists with strong self-esteem are glad to help others. Narcissists are not. The next time you hear somebody expressing sympathy for a schoolyard bully, or workplace bully for that matter, you mustn't let anybody suggest that you need to help build their confidence up even more. If the bully isn't already a narcissist, they might very well develop narcissistic traits if somebody were to, say, decide to give them self-respect training. It's not a lack of self-respect that's the problem. It's a lack of respect for others. Don't be so negative. What's the harm in a little? Narcissism? Well, maybe there's no harm. The world can be an uncaring place. There's no denying that. Demands are high and the competition is deadly. Maybe it would be for the best if we were to toughen up a little, so we could be more assertive. Could a touch of narcissism actually be a healthy thing? This begs the question, healthy for whom? If you're more selfish, a single person will benefit you. Grabbing an oversized piece of cake for yourself may benefit you in the moment, but it might also mean you won't be invited back to this particular party. I'm fully aware that these questions are difficult ones. We're constantly in danger of ending up in complex philosophical discussions about Darwin's theories of who survives in nature. The answer, unfortunately, is not the nicest, but the most adaptable. The ones who can see where things are headed and position themselves accordingly. These folks won't necessarily be the friendliest crowd. Who gets into the lifeboats first when the ship starts sinking? You can bet your life it's the narcissists. That's adaptability for you. But if they took that spot from a child, would that really be okay? My own opinion is that harming others is wrong. It would surprise me if you feel very differently. Narcissistic traits mainly harm other people. For this reason, then, I don't consider narcissism to be preferable in any context of any kind. But this is all just a small part of the truth. If you were a narcissist, you would not see anything wrong with the preceding descriptions. You would think it entirely logical that you should get a seat on the lifeboat. But please, think again. In the long run, narcissism is harmful to the narcissist too. Failing an exam because you were too overconfident is hardly beneficial to anybody. Asserting yourself so forcefully that the other person actively distances themselves from you. Where's the good in that? Being secretly hated because the people around you have seen through your lies? Is that what you wanted? If you feel good and are content with yourself, and if you feel like you're on top of the world, then by all means, as long as it helps your performance without having a negative impact on anyone else, it's all good. The problem is it rarely stays at that. 8. Emotions and narcissists, like oil and water. When you love someone, you love the person, as they are and not as you'd like them to be. Leo Tolstoy. It might seem natural to claim that the opposite of love is hate, but I'm not entirely convinced that's true. Love and hate are both strong emotions, and hate is probably the stronger of the two. The opposite of love is more likely to be apathy, the unwanted reaction. Regardless of whether narcissists are able to feel true love for anybody but themselves, they definitely seem to have access to the emotion of hatred. A social media researcher I spoke to claimed that the reason why arguments can get so heated online is, without any doubt, the fact that so many people genuinely hate the people they attack. It's not a case of mere attention seeking. They seriously want to destroy certain individuals. The reasons why will vary, but the underlying disdain is very real. Ignoring a narcissist is the optimal way of becoming the object of their unbridled rage. They hate not being seen, missing out on the action, or not being considered important. Being ostracized can be frustrating to all kinds of people, of course. But narcissists genuinely despise feeling invisible. Considering how important narcissists think they are, and how much good they think they could do for every last group of people on the planet, it's an absolute mystery how anybody could even consider ignoring them. Retribution can come quickly, in the form of a vicious assault on whoever had the nerve. The same thing happens if narcissists are questioned. They hate to be challenged, and this might sound a little odd when you consider that many narcissists don't really experience much in the way of fear. Many of them are even outright aggressive. Why wouldn't they look forward to some verbal sparring, assuming it's a subject worth debating? To understand this reaction, you need to look at the narcissistic psyche. Differences of opinion are one thing. They can actually be opportunities to sharpen your arguments and then ask for a rematch when you meet again. However, the narcissist is enraged by the very act of questioning them. How could anybody have the gall to contradict me? Me? If this perceived offense continues, their rage and frustration will turn into verbal assaults before you can say antisocial personality disorder. Again, the same thing goes for being disobeyed. There are some people, after all, who don't really appreciate being given too much direction on what to do or not do. Narcissists occasionally issue long lists of more or less ridiculous demands to the people around them, and usually, they consider it their birthright to be obeyed. If somebody fails to acknowledge this, their rage will once again be ignited. The rest of us should do as we're told, basically. Bosses with narcissistic tendencies tend to give themselves away quite quickly in this regard. They don't hesitate to ignore the inappropriateness of their reaction. If their coworker doesn't do as he's told, all hell might break loose. If we study the reverse relationship, we'll find that narcissists also hate being criticized. Any manager who has had to lead a team that includes a narcissist will know how hard it can be to reach them. They simply refuse to listen. Since everything they've ever done was great, probably some of the best work ever done, they will respond aggressively if somebody points out their errors or mistakes or even speaks poorly of the narcissist's efforts in public. If you're convinced that you're the best at everything, criticism can come as something of a shock. Instant counteroffensives are very common. They give in to an animalistic instinct to seek to destroy the enemy, that is, the source of the unjustified criticism in this case. Usually their actual performance has nothing to do with anything. Narcissists will not infrequently feel that they would do a better job as managers of their workplaces. Why aren't they the ones handing out the criticism? It's not as though there's a shortage of reasons to criticize other people. While none of this is really too surprising, there are other more subtle things that can be harder to grasp, like a refusal to respect other people's boundaries. Narcissists are essentially uninhibited, but they demand that others comply with their rules. As always, this is a one-way street, occasionally. Just like psychopaths do, narcissists will deliberately overstep other people's boundaries and then sit down and wait for a reaction. All they really want is to show us they can do it. It could be a matter of punctuality, or performing a task in a certain way, or taking other people's belongings. A peculiar example. Not too long ago, I heard of a landlord who made a habit of using his master key to enter his tenants' apartments while they were away. He didn't steal anything or get up to any other kind of mischief. Not much of anything happened, really. However, when one of the tenants grew suspicious, she hid a camera in her home. The whole affair was soon uncovered. The landlord was entering the apartments to take a look around, basically. He saw the camera, too. How do we know that? Well, he waved to the tenant in the footage. Then he left the room. When confronted with this evidence of his transgressions, all he could offer by way of explanation was that he did it because he could. He didn't like the idea that something was forbidden to him. He had to show the world that he could do as he liked. That's another thing narcissists can't stand, not being allowed to do something. Even if this is just a case of workplace regulations that apply to everybody and that everybody follows, that won't sit right with a narcissist. They feel they really ought to be afforded a little more freedom than everybody else, on account of being, well, better. Serious conflicts can arise from this, and if the narcissist's boss is a strong enough leader to keep the situation under control, that will just be another reason for the narcissist to hate them. What else? Being denied special privileges would be bad, of course. Not getting your way is an immense slight, as we all know. Not receiving good enough service is also a problem, as this indicates that somebody is failing to give them the respect they deserve by virtue of their mere existence. It might imply that somebody is paying them less attention than they are due, a serious infraction indeed. After all this, it may come as a surprise that they also hate it when they feel insufficiently appreciated by others. I'm sure the paradox here isn't lost on you. It certainly can be challenging to comprehend the contradictory nature of a narcissist. Behaving like an immature, whiny child is not going to win you any friends, basically. Nobody likes people who are always in a bad mood over some unique, special treatment they imagine they deserve just for being themselves. Are narcissists capable of loving? That's actually a trick question. Mainly, they love themselves. The question is complex, to put it lightly, because this particular love is more of a love-hate kind of deal. On the one hand, they love themselves, but on the other hand, they hate that they aren't even better, more attractive, wealthier, more popular, or whatever it is they feel they need. There's no way we could produce a definition of love that everybody would agree to. However, one that I like personally is goodness. Being good, doing good deeds. Not good as in enjoyable, that's too basic. I mean good as in ethically good. What does it mean to be good? Could it be to do something for another person without expecting anything in return? The philosophical question of whether truly unselfish acts are even rationally possible has not yet been put to bed. Despite this, it seems reasonable to say that how you behave towards somebody who can't reciprocate your behavior reveals the values you hold. It's also a context in which narcissists never prosper. The concept of goodness can't do anything for them unless they direct it at themselves. They don't mind giving some change to a homeless person as long as somebody is present to acknowledge them for it. Announcing on social media that you give money to panhandlers whenever you can is not necessarily an unselfish deed. It might also be intended as a subtle suggestion to others that the giver is good and generous on a personal level. If the giver is popular and has a large fan base, the praise will be deafening. However, most people who see a post like that know what's up, and they are not too likely to be impressed. So, what about that question about love? Is a narcissist really able to love another person? Since narcissism, like many other personality disorders, is a rather broad spectrum, there's no one-size-fits-all response here. Generally, though, it will depend on what we mean by love. Is a narcissist, then, able to love another human being in the sense of longing for that specific person, not being able to stop thinking of them, and experiencing a physical temperature shift throughout their body whenever they see the person in question? Are narcissists able to experience the pain of not getting to be with the person they want to grow old with? Do narcissists feel their whole world get brighter when the person they're waiting for walks through the door? Are narcissists able to feel the need to care for another person, significant other, child, parent, or friend, that many people feel? As usual, there is no consensus on this in the literature, but I'd still be prepared to guess that none of the above is the kind of thing a narcissist spends much thought on. What does loving somebody mean anyway? For most people, it could mean anything from "I enjoy spending time with you" to "I am prepared to give my life for you." This isn't something you can sit down and have a discussion with a narcissist about. They will simply agree with your definition, whatever it may be. If you say it's important to you that you do things for others, the narcissist will inform you that they feel the same. If you claim that love is something that makes you smile when you think of somebody, the narcissist will nod knowingly. They will under no circumstances give you the truth. They know it's not too pretty. A phrase book of love. To a narcissist, love means you make my life more comfortable. It could also mean, thank you for giving me what I need. Or, I love you because you make me look amazing. How you make a narcissist look to other people matters a great deal. If you're younger, more attractive, or have some cash hidden away for a rainy day, this will reflect well on the narcissist. Watch out. That's exactly the kind of person they want to be seen with. It could also mean, I'm glad you acknowledge me and recognize my greatness. Or, thank you for sticking around even though there isn't much in it for you. I love you really means, I love that you love MME. I love you for making my life fantastic, for continuing to tolerate my little abuses, and for never calling my bluff. I love you for buying all my bullcrap day after day. I love you for taking all the responsibility for our relationship and keeping it going. I don't have to do much while you wear yourself out trying to get me to reciprocate your love. In the worst case, I love you means you're a bigger fool than I thought. You're lucky to even get to spend time with me. Loving a narcissist is no walk in the park, basically. However, there are enough people struggling in life to ensure there will always be a steady supply of people who will put up with anything to avoid being alone. Narcissists know this too. They are fully aware that they can get away with treating their partner quite badly without having to worry about consequences. There is a wealth of testimonies from all over the world about what living with a narcissist can be like, and the reality they all describe is very different. Feel free to read more about this in Chapter 15, The Challenges of Being Close to a Narcissist. See here. It seems then that narcissists don't just have a hard time loving, but they frequently cause their partners to feel miserable and neglected. Some people describe feeling used, exploited, ignored, betrayed, and abandoned, and then to top it off, intensely hated. As one listens to some of these testimonies, the victim's denial is sometimes so obvious. He told me he loved me, so this can't be happening. Unfortunately, it is happening. To my mind, this kind of mental abuse is actually worse than physical violence. It can harm people, for life, especially good people. 9. The secret language of narcissists. And once you are awake, you shall remain awake eternally. Friedrich Nietzsche. It's not easy to tell if somebody is a narcissist just by listening to them. Narcissists have a knack for making much of what they say sound appealing, or even tempting. Skilled manipulators often have the gift of the gab. Early warning signs, of course, include talking about themselves a great deal, but that's nowhere near enough. As we've seen, there are plenty of people who do that without being narcissists. Another warning sign, which is more common in romantic relationships, is when somebody who has known you for all of 3 weeks announces that you are their soulmate. That can be nice to hear, especially if you've been thirsting for some human contact. But when you reconnect your hard drive and think about it, you'll realize that it might take more than a couple of dates to become soulmates. It's just a ruse they're using to manipulate you. However, generally, that's the kind of thing you can expect to hear from a narcissist, assuming they're in a good mood, that is. If a narcissist suffers a setback, violent rage will often follow. One way of determining if somebody's a narcissist is to compare their words with their deeds. We all make promises we can't keep from time to time. But if this is a pathological pattern, it might be time to look around for some other company. If, on the other hand, you already have a narcissist close by, it can be good to know what the real-world implications of their words will be. I've collected the following quotes from survivor forums. Yep, there are several online communities dedicated to former victims of narcissists and psychopaths. Each of these examples is so common, it definitely seems like there is a pattern to them. The truth behind a narcissist's words. Why not begin with the whole topic of soulmates? What does it mean when a narcissist calls you their soulmate? Translation? Well, all available data suggests that this simply means you are my latest supplier of everything I need. Thank you for being there for me. Hesh is just a friend. Translation: you are my main supplier of sex, money, company, adulation, or whatever I happen to need. It's amusing to me that you'll put up with so much abuse. My ex never reacted like that. Translation: my ex reacted exactly like that, which is why they are now my ex. You're actually reacting much the same as all my other victims. Your reactions encourage me to continue behaving as I do, so I can make you feel bad and cause you grief. You're being so dramatic and oversensitive. You're always overreacting. Translation: I'd like to make you think the problem is you and your completely normal reactions, rather than my own rude behavior. If we're being honest, it's me who's causing the drama. And deep down, I love to provoke chaos in any given situation. I'm also highly sensitive when it comes to criticism, and I overreact whenever my perceived greatness is endangered. Besides, I've mastered the art of projecting my emotions onto others. Have you noticed that yet? You're much better than my ex. She was completely insane. Translation: If anyone was insane in my last relationship, it was probably me. However, there is no way I will admit to being to blame for the breakup. Let's take a break. Translation: I need some time to acquire new allies and benefactors or initiate new sexual relationships. Meanwhile, feel free to miss me and feel unwanted. Besides, it's quite a drain on me to have to feign empathy all the time. I need some time off to recharge my batteries. We're just too different. Translation: I lack all empathy, but you don't. In fact, somebody like me doesn't really match up very well with somebody normal. To be completely honest, I don't think I match up very well with anybody. I'm literally surrounded by idiots. Where's your sense of humor? Or you're taking my jokes far too seriously. Or I was only kidding. Translation: I often use jokes as a subtle way of putting you down. If you can't take a joke, that's probably because you see it for what it really is, a way for me to get away with acting like a total jerk. I want to have sex. Now. Translation: I've just done something really bad, so let's have sex and strengthen our bond. That way, your attraction for me will be perpetuated by a strange biochemical cocktail that causes you to associate pleasure with pain. That way, you'll keep coming back for more. I don't want sex. Sex is of no interest to me. Translation: Withdrawing from you sexually and using other people to make you jealous allows me to coax you into believing that you're completely unwanted. I like the sense of power over you that I feel when you're insecure. It makes me feel even more superior. We don't have enough sex, or you don't agree to fill in the blank with any unthinkable act you've long since told the narcissist you will under no circumstances agree to perform, like all my past partners did. Translation: In reality, none of my previous partners ever agreed to do any of these horrible things for me. Even though I told them how my favorite porn stars do them all the time, none of them agreed to do what they found unacceptable, and they were all just as shocked as you are that I even dared to ask. However, by claiming that they did, I hope to convince you to agree to things you find absolutely detestable. I'm sorry you feel that way. Translation: I don't actually care one bit what you think. I'm pretending to care to shut you up. The problem isn't my recurring mental abuse, it's the way you react like a normal person with emotions when all I'm asking for is what I'm entitled to. How dare you? I'll never do that again. Translation: If you let me get away with this now, you can count on me to do it again. However, as I've just learned more about how you'll react, I will fine-tune my next transgression just a little for maximum effect. I'm a really nice guy, girl. Translation: If I really were such a nice person, would I have to keep pointing it out? Wouldn't my actions just speak for themselves? That's right. Let's be friends. Translation: Please dial down your expectations so it will be easier for me to keep using you until somebody better turns up. I've had enough. Translation: Yuck. You're a normal person with normal emotions and empathy and stuff. I can't deal with this. You seem to think you're something else. Translation: You are something else. But the fact that you're so secure about yourself is making me insecure, and I can't deal with that. Therefore, I've decided to explain to you that you're not as attractive or popular as you seem to think. Give me a few months, and I'll crumble every bit of your confidence. Nobody cares about you or your achievements in life. Translation: Far too many people care. Therefore, I'm going to isolate you from your supporters and take you down a couple of notches. There's only room for one winner in this relationship. You're nuts. You're such a narcissist. Translation: I know very well that the narcissist here is probably me, but I'd prefer it if you felt as bad about it as I do. This needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, of course. But a narcissist's stream of consciousness might actually look this confused. When you think you might be dealing with a narcissist, you need to practice recognizing all these varieties of malarkey for what they are. The sooner, the better. 10. When did a little narcissism ever hurt anyone? People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Carl Jung. At this point, we need to ask ourselves some questions. These include, does it really matter to the rest of us that there are a few narcissists running around out there? What harm can it do if some people think about themselves a bit too much? These are relevant questions because the world is facing a fair number of challenges of various kinds and various magnitudes. So somewhere along the line, we're going to have to prioritize. Which problem do we take on first? One way of determining whether a problem is even worth trying to solve might be to reflect on whether it can be solved in the first place. Many problems are readily solvable while others require gargantuan efforts. Climate change is a problem of the latter variety. Those who propose we do all we can are prepared to accept the costs. However, they are pitted against those who feel the problem doesn't even need solving or can't be solved. Others still claim there isn't even a problem in the first place. This is a large part of the reason why the proponents of competing theories can never seem to agree. They're not working from a common definition of what the problem even is. In that situation, there's not going to be much point in discussing solutions until people have come to an agreement about the problem. Maybe somebody's mother-in-law is a total nightmare. Maybe somebody's uncle goes on horrendous benders at the weekends. That's too bad, of course. But those are things that might be solvable, or might not be solvable, depending on who you ask. Either way, resolving these situations won't require the same kinds of efforts that tackling climate change and its consequences will. The strengths of a narcissist. So, what do narcissists do well? Besides lying, deceiving, and defrauding you, they're also very adept at identifying your weaknesses. They go about it the same way psychopaths do. In the initial stages of your relationship, they will spend a great deal of time figuring out who you are. Basically, they're studying you. This is particularly common during the initial love bombing phase, when they shower you with false promises, flowers, and chocolate. They will tell you fabricated secrets about themselves to get you to open up and tell them things you might not have felt like telling them. The point of this activity is exactly what you'd expect, to learn everything they can about you so that they can use it against you in the future. A narcissist confides in you that they live in fear of becoming homeless. You tell them you sometimes freak out over the idea of losing your job and not being able to pay your bills. Good, they know that now. Might be useful at some point. Is the narcissist really scared of homelessness? Who can say? Probably not. But now they know something about you. Something that might come in handy down the line. It could be that you're afraid of going at high speeds. This might cause a particularly malicious narcissist to drive very fast in some situation, where they want to unbalance you. Perhaps you tell them that you're particularly uncomfortable around aggressive outbursts and raised voices. The narcissist will wait for the perfect moment to shout at you and make you submit. Just as they put you on a pedestal by doing all the things they know you like, they can tear you down from there anytime they want, by doing all the things you don't like, sometimes in a very cruel way. It simply depends on what the narcissist wants on the occasion in question. They know what triggers your insecurities, your traumas, your fears. Remember that narcissists have no inhibitions. They just go ahead and do whatever comes to mind. Since they lack empathy, there's nothing to prevent them from acting on some imagined reason or another to hurt you. They also happen to be very good at maintaining a charming facade. Anybody who has tried to break up with a narcissist has heard this or something like it. What? You're breaking up with so-and-so? Why? She is so nice. Narcissists spend a great deal of time cultivating this superficially perfect persona for themselves. Because most of the people who listen to them are more or less like yourself, they believe in that image. Because your friends don't live with narcissists, they won't believe you when you tell them what your partner actually did. Why should they? After all, they've already been told that you've changed beyond recognition. One thing many people find to be a bit of a contradiction is the fact that most narcissists actually have a very good grasp of how people function. Although their own emotional lives are different, and although they lack empathy, they still understand what makes the rest of us tick. They've studied us up close, with zero emotional interference. This gives them an edge when it comes to analyzing what's actually going on. One of the more important reasons for this is that they need to learn to mimic human emotions. And they have learned to do that, don't you doubt it. Surely, though, they must have weaknesses too? Plenty. Naturally, they refuse to discuss most of them. They hate apathy. Being overlooked is a narcissist's kryptonite. They can't take it when people don't pay attention to them. They prefer anger or hatred over apathy. Any kind of reaction is interpreted as evidence that they matter to somebody else. It's very frustrating if somebody refuses to respond to the narcissist's antics, because this suggests that the narcissist has no power over the person in question. How do you provoke anguish and misery in somebody who doesn't seem to care? Being loved in the early stages of a relationship is important. That's an obvious source of recognition. Apathy? No response equals no potential to sabotage the other party. How can you ruin somebody's day when they're not even listening to you? If the intended victim is able to just move on without so much as a glance in the narcissist's direction, this can trigger a total breakdown. They can never truly belong to the world you and I live in. Their superficial emotions simply blind them to life's true potential. Once they realize this, remember, these aren't psychopaths who would simply congratulate themselves over being free of the trouble emotions seem to bring. They can suffer deep depressions. A narcissist knows that there are parts of life that are inaccessible to them. This insight probably doesn't arrive until the individual grows older and learns to reflect on their own deeds and their life. Some narcissists get this stuff, absolutely. It's a sliding scale with the vulnerable narcissists who actually hate themselves at one of the extremes. They know that everybody hates them and that nothing they can do will change that. It's a complex blend of enjoying the privileges that come from not getting mixed up in messy emotions on the one hand and knowing that people detest you for that very same reason on the other. In case you've ever thought to yourself that it might be nice to be more narcissistic, think again. They're all rather apathetic inside. They will never experience true love. They know it exists, certainly, and they grasp the concept, but they are nonetheless forever shut out from it. It's not for them. And since narcissists hate to be denied anything, the whole situation can get very confusing. Can narcissists be dangerous? Now we've returned to the question I posed at the start of this chapter. Does it really matter to the rest of us that there are a few narcissists running around out there? A relevant question here is what harm a narcissist can do to a fellow human being. Could they pose a genuine danger to you or to your family, for example? How do we define danger in this context? We could approach it from many points of view. We could discuss danger in terms of risk to individuals, which would be the simple example. This can in turn be divided into physical dangers versus psychological dangers. Many people who are neither narcissists nor psychopaths are capable of violent behavior. Husbands who beat their wives are usually just cowards who would never dare strike another man. They wouldn't pick on anybody who might fight back. Unfortunately, bullies have been around forever. But we simply don't know if narcissism is correlated with violent behavior. It all seems to depend somewhat on whatever the narcissist's particular baggage happens to be. Research has found that parents who abuse their children have often suffered similar abuses as children. However, this is shaky ground, seeing as many others with the same history behave very differently. They manage to break the chain of their parents' abuse and don't pass it on to their own kids. But we still have no convincing evidence that narcissists are more likely to resort to violence than others. My own personal reflection is that if you live with somebody and find yourself entertaining the notion that your significant other might be dangerous, caution is very much advised. If I were you, I'd already be packing my bags. There's no point in waiting to see. However, if the question is whether a narcissist might pose a psychological danger, the answer is definitely yes. Just like psychopaths do, they cause mental harm to others by their behavior. They manipulate, they lie, they cheat, they use, they indulge in mind games. And they can be so genuinely evil to their partners that it seems almost impossible that anybody could avoid being influenced by it. We know that a large proportion of those afflicted with post-traumatic stress disorder have been exposed to a particularly venomous kind of relationship. These emotional abuses often go on for decades. Narcissists are sophisticated bullies, and although their methods are less brutal than those of psychopaths, they still tend to prey on people's emotions in ways that are bound to have far-reaching, if not permanent, negative effects on somebody's trust. In summary, narcissists are bad news for your mental health. However, narcissists can also pose a danger to groups of people. Take a company or a business, for example. When an individual behaves in a way that impairs the company's functions, they can cause a great deal of damage, of course. The worst case scenario is when the boss is a narcissist. A person like that could exploit their position to pit their employees against one another, the old divide and conquer approach. However, narcissists can cause a great deal of harm on other levels, too. We can always think of narcissism as the psychological counterpart to secondhand smoke. Their behavior usually ends up harming the narcissists themselves, but it does equal harm, if not more, to the people around them. The effects are more immediate in this case than with secondhand smoke. However, narcissists can be deeply manipulative and can cause their victims a lot of trouble, just like psychopaths and Machiavellians. If you don't see it coming, it can become dangerous indeed. So, in conclusion, I'd have to say narcissists do create problems for the rest of us. Also, the closer you happen to be to a narcissist, the greater the risk will be that you might experience something you'd rather not. 11. Manipulation. If you are an approval addict, your behavior is as easy to control as that of any other junkie. All a manipulator need do is a simple two-step process: give you what you crave and then threaten to take it away. Every drug dealer in the world plays this game. Harriet B. Breaker, who's pulling your strings. Narcissists want to cut your social ties to make you more pliable and easier to manage. There are countless manipulation techniques. Imagine that a narcissist would use 2, 3, or why not all of these techniques on you at once. You could suffer devastating consequences. The strange thing here is that a great number of narcissists and other manipulative types are up to similar mischief. Sometimes I wonder if there must be a secret manual out there somewhere. Arbitrary positive feedback. Giving an individual powerful personal recognition at times, and at times withholding it. Making a person dependent on the particular kind of acknowledgement they crave in order to feel good. We all want recognition of some sort. Perhaps you're one of those people who feel good when they're told they've done a good job. It feels nice to receive your boss's praise. Imagine that you just left a job where praise and positive feedback were in scarce supply. The most common reason for somebody to speak to you was to tell you what you had done wrong. As I discussed earlier, we all have flaws and weaknesses. Many managers are terrible at acknowledging their team members' efforts. Perhaps they are quicker to criticize than to praise. Now, you've found a new job, and your new boss gives you a great welcome to the company. She immediately acknowledges your best qualities and praises you for being efficient, organized, helpful, competent, and a bunch of other things you're proud of yourself for. What effect would this have on you? It would make you want to work even harder to receive more positive feedback. In just 2 weeks, your boss has made you enjoy your work more than you ever have before in years of professional life. Things carry on this way for a few months, but then, suddenly, your new boss falls silent. No further recognition is forthcoming. After finally getting the credit you deserve for your hard work, you're suddenly facing a wall of stifling silence. Whenever you and your boss meet in the hallway, she just looks right through you. She doesn't respond to your questions, doesn't even acknowledge your existence with a brief look your way. A long, endless month passes like this in silence. How would you react to this? You would work even harder to get your daily dose of appreciation. But then, suddenly, your boss summons you to her office again. She's gushing with praise over something or other that you've done. Dumbstruck with gratitude, you stumble out of her office, ecstatic over suddenly receiving her attention again. Perhaps you'll even accuse yourself of being overly sensitive. Maybe it's not ideal for you to be that desperate for attention, but praise does motivate. Recognition keeps you going. When it is withheld, you're bound to feel a bit hollow. If your boss asks you for help again, and you think there is some promise of personal recognition in it for you, you'll do whatever you're asked to do, even if the task is one that you don't really enjoy. You'll do it, and again, you'll be praised for working so hard. You'll feel better, and everything will seem okay. Bit by bit, your boss will be able to get you to take on assignments you would never even have considered before. Then she falls silent again. She makes a face in a meeting when you're speaking. Or maybe she ignores you entirely. This stratagem will allow your boss to send you off on an emotional roller coaster. Perhaps she plans to ask you for something truly inappropriate later on, or simply to get you to work harder without asking for anything in return. Little by little, your behavior will change, and you'll find yourself crossing boundaries you would never have considered crossing before. How will you react? Well, That depends on who you are. Feel free to take another look at the 4 colors in Chapter 4. Here, if red is dominant in your personality, this boss's behavior might enrage you. In general, you actually don't need as much recognition as the average person does. You know your abilities and your limits. You're not emotionless, of course, but you're probably brave enough to confront your boss and ask what she's playing at. In this case, she'd be certain to deny everything, and you'll be free to decide what to do. Next, if you're mostly blue, it's very much the same story. You're capable of assessing your own workplace performance. You already know what constitutes quality work. You also happen to be naturally suspicious of praise. While this doesn't mean blues are immune to this kind of manipulation, it does make it a lot harder to cultivate the kind of insecurity described in the preceding example. Since both reds and blues are fact-oriented, their relationship to their boss will matter less to them than it would to others. If your profile is dominated by yellow, yellow-green, yellow-red, or yellow-blue, you'll be vulnerable to this unfair tactic. You're dependent on recognition to begin with, public recognition ideally, and receiving it makes you feel incredible. Yellows will often deny this as they feel it sounds too self-centered. But that doesn't make it any less true, of course. Be honest with yourself. You know that praise has an effect on you, and you know what it feels like to be suddenly banished into the cold. If you're denied recognition from the people you hold in high esteem, you will feel weak and vulnerable. It's like being invisible. Praise, silence, praise, silence. Yellows might even talk to their coworkers about it, although the appearance of being rejected by the boss might trouble them. Some will decide to keep it all to themselves. Yellows won't quite have the courage to confront the boss about their behavior. This is particularly true of yellow-greens. For them, the risk of escalation is severe, and they will be very uncomfortable with the situation. Little by little, the yellow will submit to the whims of the boss. Green workers are quite sensitive about relationship issues too, and they also tend to choose to suffer in silence. They will never confront the boss. It all comes down to how the positive acknowledgement was initially delivered. Perhaps the boss has celebrated the Green's endeavors in front of the whole team in the past. They hate that kind of attention. Not having to endure that kind of public attention is always going to be good news for the Green. However, if the boss has realized that, summoning the Green to their office to receive the praise in a more intimate setting is what the Green prefers. That is specifically what will be withheld. Greens have a glaring weakness in this sense. Considering all of this, arbitrary positive feedback is a potent weapon. The trick is to get the victim accustomed to receiving positive feedback first. The effects really take hold once it's withheld. Arbitrary negative feedback. When a manipulator uses negative feedback, they stop doing something you dislike when you start doing something they like. As a result, you end up doing what they want. This is complicated from the outset in relationships. Maybe you want to go out with the guys on a Friday night, but your girlfriend is all grouchy about it and keeps making a scene until you call to cancel on your friends. Now she's suddenly all smiles again. Or inversely, she wants to have a girls' night out, and you feel there's been a bit much of that lately. Why can't she spend Friday night with you for a change? When you express your request, she gets angry and complains about everything you ever did or didn't do. Soon you give in and say, fine, go out with your friends. And just like that, everything is sunshine and rainbows again. Her mood seems to hinge on what you say. This tactic is just as simple as it is effective. You get negative feedback consistently until you give in and concede the argument. Then, everything returns to normal. It's an easy way to make you come to heel. Nothing to it. Now, you need to see through the pattern here. Your manipulator knows that you are acquiescing in the hope it will bring relief from the negative behavior she's subjecting you to. The problem is, if you start backing down, you're very likely to keep going. And now your behavior is being determined by somebody else. Next, imagine a skilled manipulator who has learned to optimize the combined use of both positive and negative arbitrary feedback. You won't be able to make sense of them or predict their behavior. None of it has any real connection to your actions. No matter what you do or don't do, you could receive any given reaction. You're entirely subjected to the whims of the manipulator. Can you imagine the stress? Countermeasures. Your behavior is exactly the same as in the example of arbitrary positive feedback. You need to learn to see through it. Sometimes all it takes is indicating that you've seen what's going on. If you're dealing with a healthy individual who doesn't have any ill intent, you'll probably end up having a fruitful discussion in which you resolve the issue and decide to move on. It can be useful to know that manipulation often occurs subconsciously. If something works, you keep doing it. Many people don't even consider the harm they do their victims, but if it's pointed out to them, everything changes. As I noted at the start of this book, most of us mostly think of ourselves after all. That's how you can tell if you're dealing with a narcissist or some kind of subconscious manipulator. Trust your gut instincts. If something feels wrong, chances are it is wrong. There's no need to apologize for your feelings in a situation like this. You have the right to do whatever you need to do to protect yourself. Step off the train. Get on another one. Love bombing. I'm sure you've heard of this technique before. Note: many men are prone to variations of this behavior in the early stages of a relationship, before the realities of everyday life take hold. This doesn't make them narcissists or psychopaths, just less charming and engaging members of their gender. Don't hate them for it. They may just not know any better. In any case, the term love bombing has been used to denote this despicable tactic for many years now. The narcissist begins by announcing their unconditional love for you. They expose themselves completely to you, perhaps opening up to you over dinner, which you're paying for, of course, about how they've never met somebody like you before. It's incredible. In all their life, you are the most exceptional person they've ever met, and they want to grow old with you. This ego pampering is kept up until you surrender, basically. All of this could happen within 3 weeks of getting to know the other person. If you're a red, you've always been told that you can be insensitive at times. And now here comes somebody who doesn't seem to have any problem with that. In fact, they even encourage your dominant alpha behavior. They appreciate it when somebody has the guts to take charge. If you're a yellow, you may know deep down that you have a way of claiming every last bit of oxygen in the room for yourself. However, your new soulmate wants nothing more than to hear more entertaining and amusing anecdotes from your interesting life. Finally, somebody who appreciates your greatness. Narcissists will tell greens that they've always admired the strong and silent type because of the stability and security they radiate. Finally, somebody with the sense to keep quiet and leave some space for their partner. Just think if everybody else could do it just as naturally and unpretentiously as you. Blues, who have always suspected they may be a bit too square and dull, will be told that their enormous intellects are incredibly sexy. A full 12.36% sexier than the mean of all samples collected according to such and such principle, and so on. Add the following to the equation: gifts, flowers, friendly gestures, warmth, kisses, 24/7's text messages with cute lovey-dovey messages from your admirer. I know, it all looks ridiculously simple from the outside. How would it feel to be told you're the pinnacle of nature's creation by somebody you have strong feelings for? Can you honestly swear you'd be invulnerable to that? The unfortunate truth here is that the narcissist is merely getting you into position for their inevitable ambush. Perhaps 6 months or a year from now, that all depends on how extensive their scheme is, which will in turn tend to depend on your financial resources. The love bombing will suddenly cease, as if by magic. Poof. One fine day, your texts will go unanswered. The hand that is usually in yours when you go shopping stays in its pocket. Perhaps your betrothed is suddenly smiling at other people in a way that seems far too inviting. Sooner or later, they will start telling you about their past relationships. There are plenty of things you have no desire to know about. However, those might well be the precise things they are talking about. Now, you might already be married or expecting a child. All you can do is go along for the ride. Then, boom, suddenly you're being criticized for the very same personality traits they used to praise you for. If you're a red, you're suddenly being told how you're far too dominant and that your need to call all the shots is stifling them. Yellows will be accused of being too flighty and immature and of never listening. Greens will be accused of stubbornly resisting any and all change and of never wanting to leave the house. And blues will probably be chided for being so incredibly dull, such sticklers for procedure, so hopeless. Perhaps you'll be faced by a wall of silence. For a whole week, your partner refuses to respond when spoken to, gets up before you, goes to bed after you, locks themselves in rooms, leaves the house without explaining where they're going. This makes for an extremely draining combination. Can you imagine all the thoughts that will pass through your mind? Slowly, gradually, things keep getting worse, much worse. Nonetheless, there are moments when you get the attention you crave. All of a sudden, you find yourself enjoying a romantic weekend trip with lots of wonderful moments to share. You breathe a sigh of relief. Whew, your partner is back to being the loving person you once learned to love. There's still hope. You still mean something to them. Until, that is, they withdraw again, and you've unwittingly sat back down on the emotional roller coaster from hell. Whatever they ask for, you'll try to provide. You want to be happy after all. What to do when you're being love bombed? How do you correctly handle a narcissist's love bombing? Keep your cool. Remember this, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Read that sentence at least 3 times. Write it down and look at it whenever you have some time to spare. It's actually incredibly simple when it comes to romantic relationships. You should try to put your emotions to the side. Yes, I know that this sounds like a contradiction, but think about it. If you were to tell everybody you know that you finally met your soulmate and that you're about to move in together after knowing each other for just 7 days, what would your well-meaning friends say to you? I can guarantee you they will question your mental state. 7 days? Are you out of your mind? On the other hand, if you've been dating somebody for 7 years without even moving in together, who's fooling who here? So we've established that a stable relationship takes more than 7 days, but less than 7 years to form. How long does it take exactly? I don't know, and neither do you. You can look at it statistically. How many relationships do you know of where the couple met, moved in together, and got married all within a few weeks? Or for that matter, a few months? How long did these relationships last? If you need more than your left thumb to count them, I owe you lunch. The objective of love bombing is for the manipulator to force themselves onto you with such intense energy that you never have time to pay attention to who they really are. For heaven's sake, please don't fall for this. If it's genuine, this person will keep the love bombing up for at least a year. If they have the means and the commitment to do so, then perhaps they are right for you after all. But if not, you should be cautious about exposing yourself to emotional harm early on in the relationship. It's sad, but true. Smoke screens. This manipulation technique aims to confuse you. No more, no less. You're overreacting again. You're so volatile. Can't you see how much trouble you're causing? A skilled manipulator can say just about anything to get you off guard. The objective here is to shift the focus from the genuine issue to a discussion about some serious flaw of yours. To get there, they'll have to push some of your emotional buttons. If, for example, you have serious suspicions that your partner is cheating on you, you may want to have a talk about it. Perhaps you're completely calm. You just want to talk. All you are looking for is confirmation that your suspicions are unfounded, but rather than discuss the true issue, the potential cheating, your partner denies everything and shifts the focus of the conversation to you. Your own flaws and weaknesses are suddenly more important. For example, there is the matter of your unflattering jealousy. How can you make such outrageous accusations? All this is intended to do is raise doubts about your relationship. The infidelity may or may not have actually occurred. You may actually find real proof of it. It wouldn't be too surprising either, considering how promiscuous narcissists tend to be. So, what do? Well, you confront them with your discoveries, of course. Again, focus immediately shifts to something else. In this case, the fact that you've been snooping around in their car. A serious infraction indeed. Ironically, you end up the accused here for being so untrusting. Considering how you behave, it would be little wonder if somebody cheated on you. Not that they did, of course. A manipulator with strong narcissistic tendencies is capable of the most incomprehensible behavior, as long as it promises to shift your focus away from them. Once you've been drawn into this confusing world, you need to bear in mind that the ordinary rules no longer apply. How to protect yourself. Now, it doesn't matter what color you are, everybody is vulnerable to this. I imagine reds and blues might find it a little less of a challenge to resist, but nobody is entirely immune to manipulation. Stay cool and stay rational. Note any deviations in your counterpart's behavior, and be prepared to confront them with what you discover. Say things like, "I think you changed the subject there, right?" Could we finish the conversation we were having first? Or, of course, we can discuss my shortcomings, but right now I am more interested to know why there is lipstick on your collar. Or, my hearing is fine. There's no need to shout. It's not okay. Please, stop immediately. Or the simplest response of all, leave the room, the house, or the county. Bring the subject up when there are other people around. For example, do it in a restaurant or in the company of somebody you trust, a mutual acquaintance, relative, or other person whose presence makes this technique too obvious to be used without the narcissist exposing themselves completely. When others can see the bad behavior come out, the whole situation tends to change. As I've touched on previously, narcissists tend to be rather preoccupied with what everybody else thinks of them. The problem here is that your narcissist is bound to have combined this technique with a whole load of other stuff, so that when they decide to call you out on whatever personality trait you happen to be the most ashamed of, you'll be quite likely to just back down instinctively. If you're like most people, you'll find the whole situation unbearable. But sometimes it's better to tough things out for a while and really get at the problem when your own emotions are used against you. Another form of manipulation involves turning your own emotions against you. This tactic is designed to shift your attention away from the real problem. The idea is to apply pressure to sensitive points in your personality, aspects of yourself that you may be aware of, and perhaps don't even like. Emotions are tough to handle. Hard emotions are even worse. Imagine a red person with a characteristically confrontational mindset. This might seem like a tough nut to crack, but then again, maybe not. Reds can behave in a very bristly fashion, sometimes even aggressively. Assuming they are relatively self-aware, they will know about the problem. Sometimes things can get out of hand. It's easy for the manipulator to trigger anger in their victim. If there's smoke coming out of the fuse box, it's easy to exclaim, "There you go again, yelling at me. You're always mad, it's not healthy." The consequences are readily predictable. From now on, you'll be discussing the aggressive behavior of the red rather than whatever it was the manipulator did in the first place. This also works the other way around, however. If the manipulator knows that their red victim is uncomfortable with the outbursts and with the endless discussions of anything but the point that will follow, if they lose their temper, they will say things like the following: "Are you about to throw one of your tantrums again? I guess you'll be screaming in my face as usual in just a second. I knew this was going to happen. Please, stop shouting." The red stifles their anger to keep from falling for this ploy. It's quite a task for somebody with a fiery temper. If the red has decided not to lose their cool, there will be some price to pay, and it will take a lot of inner effort. If the manipulator's victim is a yellow, the situation is different. In this context, the initial tactic of eliciting a certain behavior would go something like this. "I suppose you're about to blabber on about God knows what without making any sense. Why do you always have to talk about yourself? You never listen to me." This is definitely the weakness of yellows, their aversion to putting themselves first. In response, the yellow will begin to speak loudly, rapidly, and anxiously. And if we're being honest, they won't be making much sense. The groundwork is done, and the manipulator can lean back and say, "I told you so, didn't I? You only talk about yourself. You don't care about anybody else." The second version is similar to the red example. "Could you be quiet for once and let me speak? Hello?" Throw some tears into the mix, and a yellow will be at a loss for words. They'll grit their teeth and fight hard to resist their instincts. Everything will stay bottled up inside, and they'll end up feeling awful. The manipulator has silenced them effectively. Greens are sensitive, and they respond in completely different ways. If a manipulator is living with a green victim, they'll have a pretty easy time of things from the get-go. I wouldn't go so far as to say greens are the most prone to being manipulated, but they are agreeable by nature, and they always aim to please. Unfortunately, this makes them ripe victims for nefarious characters. Considering this, how is anybody able to be deliberately mean to a green? Sorry, I was thinking logically there. That won't do, of course. Naturally, narcissists don't care how anybody else feels. The green is simply a tool to be used to gain some advantage or another. The manipulator might divert the green's attention by telling them, "You never speak, you're a coward, and you always back down. You're too damned afraid to discuss anything, ever. I'm so fed up with you." This is often closer to the truth than the green would like, and so this statement can cause some emotional turmoil. The manipulator is trying to provoke this exact behavior. The green withdraws and sits there with a lump in their throat. Beneath the surface, their frustration is raging. There's so much they would have liked to say, but how? They hate getting into arguments. You can even get a green to act in ways that directly contradict their own instincts. A truly skilled manipulator is able to get a green sufficiently off balance to trigger their rage. Everything gets vented, and lots of harsh language and negativity comes out. The green will lay it on, thick, mentioning every last injury they feel they have suffered over the last few years. The rage won't die down either. These individuals hold grudges, so they will have plenty to work with. The benefit for the manipulator here is the horrendous shame the green will experience afterwards. Devastated, they will offer heartfelt apologies for their actions. The narcissist plays the victim expertly, quickly negotiating their way into further benefits as compensation for all the abuse they just endured. How could you be so mean? Poor me. This is going to end up costing the green. You can count on that. How does a manipulator exploit the behavior of blues? It's simpler than you might imagine, actually. One way of pushing a blue's buttons is to subject them to situations they aren't comfortable with. For instance, forcing them to join a team of all yellows for a project. That could get really uncomfortable. The blue would have a hard time formulating a single cohesive thought. However, a blue might be able to handle this. Their relationships with their coworkers and managers aren't as important to them as they would be to others. But in close relationships, blues are as vulnerable as anybody else. Let's say a blue's wife wants him to do something he doesn't want to do. She wants to go away for a weekend getaway. She's picked the best hotel, and she expects him to pay for it all. Expensive is an understatement. Also, some rather uninhibited shopping is to be expected. This is a special weekend, after all. It all depends on him. Again, the first attack has him concerned. His wife has anticipated his response, so she bluntly demands that he refrain from getting the calculator out. She wants him to listen to her for once. Since he loves his wife, he agrees. Besides, he's good at mental math. He ultimately determines that it's too expensive, not within his means. And then the wife makes the move she's been planning all along. She accuses him of being uncaring. How can he be so cold to her? If he really loved her, he would do this for her just this once. If he persists in resisting, she breaks out the weapon that not even a blue can resist: tears. Emotions run raw. The outburst doesn't die down until he begins to muse out loud whether he might take on some extra overtime to finance a trip he has no interest in taking. Countermeasures. Emotions are a very messy subject, and there are no surefire solutions. Usually your main priority is to stay calm. However, this can be quite challenging, particularly for extroverts. Both reds and yellows tend to react instinctively, and they may need some time to think things through. My best advice actually is to call them out. State openly that you feel like they're trying to manipulate you, and ask how this makes them feel. In a later part of this book, I will give you a set of hands-on methods for escaping the clutches of a narcissist. Feel free to go over them in more detail. Act red. Let your true emotions out and react forcefully and quickly. Save yourself from becoming a mere shadow of your former self. If you don't, that's what your partner will turn you into. They will dilute you until you're just a pale replica of who you used to be. Anytime you feel chronically unhappy, anxious, or hurt, you'll get caught up in the drama you're currently going through, and you'll have a very hard time picking up on the big picture and figuring out the details of the narcissist's far-reaching plans. You need to remember something I've mentioned before in this book. Narcissists don't experience emotions the way you and I do. They often fake it, and when they drop the pretense, you'll have all the information you need to make your decision. Don't forget that whoever is the most anxious to preserve the relationship will be the weakest. Why should you give a narcissist a single minute more of your time? You deserve so much better. Gaslighting. This method is all about confusing the victim and getting them off balance. Let's say you live with a narcissist. Now, they tell you they're working on a big surprise for you. You'd better make sure your bags are packed for next weekend. Excited? You wonder what this might be about. Naturally, you pack your bags, get your hair cut, and call all your friends to share the news. What do they think the surprise might be? It's all so exciting. You make sure to get everything ready for the big weekend. And when Friday arrives, you're a little surprised that your partner doesn't mention anything. It's almost as though they'd forgotten all about what they said on Tuesday. On Saturday morning, when you cautiously broach the subject, they look nonplussed. What are you talking about? I'm playing golf with my friends today. And with that, they're gone. You're left alone with your confusion. You suppose there must have been some misunderstanding. Reacting to this as though it were completely unthinkable is evidence that you're completely normal. Or how about this? Your girlfriend is getting ready to go out with her friends. She tells you she's going to meet up with Susan. Susan is going out with a friend of yours, so when it gets late and your girlfriend has neither returned home nor responded to your text messages, you check with your friend to see if Susan made it back okay. He tells you Susan has been in all evening. What's this? Is there something going on here? This could mean absolutely anything, but I suspect I know what most people would think. When she finally gets home, in the middle of the night, you're upset and you accuse her of lying. She wasn't out with Susan after all. Since your girlfriend is a narcissist, she will simply tell you that she said Sandy, not Susan. You are 100% certain you heard her say Susan. There's no way it was Sandy, and who is Sandy anyway? At this point, your girlfriend will resort to some shenanigans. If you're a red, you'll be told that you're an insensitive buffoon and a terrible listener. If you're a yellow, she'll suggest that you only think about yourself and that you really should make the effort to learn the names of her friends. If you're a green, she'll simply raise her voice and shout until you yield. And if you're a blue, she might well question your mental capacity. Perhaps you need to be evaluated for Alzheimer's. Gaslighting is all about causing confusion. The narcissist says one thing on Monday, another on Tuesday, and denies ever having said either by the time Wednesday rolls around. You can keep up with this for a while, but a skilled narcissist will apply this approach step by step. They start out small and then increase the volume gradually. In the end, you won't have a clue what's going on. Gaslighting is particularly effective because of the great ease with which a narcissist can lie. Without giving it more thought than you would in calling a taxi, they're able to say any falsehood that may suit their devious purposes. If anybody around you tries something like this on you and you pick up on the signs in time, run. I don't think I can make my advice any clearer than that. A general attitude to manipulative machinations. Trust. This might be the key to the whole situation. We need to understand why we should or shouldn't trust a person. New acquaintances. It doesn't take us long to make up our minds. We're either in favor or opposed. The person either feels reliable or doesn't. Think about what makes you trust a certain person. If you've begun to trust somebody, you're going to be prepared to listen to them. Thus, you need to pay attention to what causes you to trust a person. Once you view this person as reliable, trustworthy, and deserving of your confidence, you've already stacked the deck against yourself ever so slightly. Anything that person says is going to be considered the truth. The messenger will become more important than the actual message. However, if somebody does win your trust, this can't mean you. Suddenly take everything they say and do at face value from that point on. You need to consider each separate action in isolation, and you definitely need to question anything that feels off, even when you're dealing with somebody you essentially trust. A person's trustworthiness can be reconsidered regularly if they act in ways that you're not okay with. The advice I usually give to people who wonder how to determine if they can trust somebody is to compare their words to their deeds. If they match up well enough, that's excellent. You may have a future together. If their words seldom or even never match their actual deeds, there's no basis for trust. You can't rely on this person. The terms of trust. Trust depends on three things: predictability, reliability, and conviction. Predictability is a consequence of another's behavior. It contrasts with unpredictable behavior, such as positive feedback being offered and withheld at random, or loving and tender speech being suddenly replaced with silence and criticism over things that used to be lauded as positives. When somebody's behavior is highly variable, this might not necessarily be caused by an intention to manipulate you, but it is nonetheless a call for caution. A psychological diagnosis like bipolar disorder is one thing, but narcissism is something else entirely. The former can be treated, the latter cannot. Reliability is what determines whether you can assume somebody will be honest and worthy of your trust in the long term. Can you rely on this individual? Have you caught them in the act of lying to you or withholding information from you? How much evidence have you seen of long-term trustworthiness? Did the honeymoon only last a few weeks before the truth was revealed? Not much point holding on to that then. However, if this person has stayed by your side through thick and thin and is still there to protect you from the evils of the world, you can feel quite secure. Conviction, finally, is a matter of how convinced you are that this person will respond to your needs and behave like a loving, supporting partner. Beyond the first month or so, narcissists are quite impatient. They want their rewards to come quickly. They can't keep up appearances indefinitely. Therefore, you could be making a huge mistake if you base your evaluation of somebody's trustworthiness on their past behavior alone. Assess the predictability, reliability, and conviction of a person and reflect on them right now. Not last year, not before you were married, and not that time at your parents' house. You should be considering what happened yesterday, or what is happening right now, in a conversation where the things the person says are making you almost physically sick. Is the relationship worth putting up with this kind of behavior? Is what you just witnessed acceptable behavior? Is what you just heard the kind of thing people should be proud to say? Skilled manipulators are experts at winning your trust, but they can be bad at keeping it. Unless you let them off the hook, of course. Once you've seen through the manipulator's tricks, act immediately. This should be no different from domestic abuse. One strike and you're out. They will only hurt you again. All available research confirms it. Their bad behavior is just the tip of the iceberg. There's much more to come. It's the same with psychological manipulation. If your partner exhibits this kind of behavior, you can be 100% certain they will do it again. Narcissists and people with narcissistic traits use proven methods. If they can make you back down again by manipulating you some more, why wouldn't they? To simplify things even further, if a thief finds a $100 bill on the ground, puts it in his pocket, and then enjoys a great night out on someone else's money, why would he leave the next $100 bill he finds where it is? More methods of manipulation. Unfortunately, there are plenty more of these tricks. Feigned intimacy. Early on in the relationship, the narcissist reveals intimate details which will probably turn out to be fabricated about themselves, which inspires you to share things about yourself. And these admissions will eventually be weaponized and turned against you. Guilt tripping. The narcissist finds ways of blaming everything that isn't frictionless in your relationship on you. Indirect insults. These are more or less subtle disses, concealed beneath a layer of feigned benevolence. I like it when you wear that dress. It makes you look so slim. Insinuations. This is the use of statements so ambiguous it's hard to determine what's being said. For example, no, you could make so much money doing white-collar crime. Vacuous statements. Narcissists put no weight on anything they say. They might say anything that seems appropriate to them in the moment. For example, I love you. It might give you a moment's relief, but it won't really mean anything. Narcissists aren't capable of love. Minimization. The narcissist convinces you that what they did wasn't really so bad. What? Doesn't everyone do that? It's not like anything happened. You're getting caught up with the minutiae again. Lies. How do you detect a lie in the midst of all this nonsense? If you observe the other behaviors here, you can safely assume the narcissist is lying to you too. About everything. Constantly. Are their lips moving? Start the recording. Condescension. This is a classic gambit which involves downplaying every opinion, emotion, or experience you give voice to. For example, you really shouldn't be feeling that way. You're kidding, right? Surely that was no big deal. Charm. Narcissists will often seek to win you over with charm first. They don't often start out insulting you. That approach hasn't worked too well for them in the past. You'll be told things nobody has ever said to you before. And honestly, who wouldn't enjoy being swept off their feet by a load of lovely compliments? Deliberate forgetfulness. Narcissists forget to go shopping before dinner, even though they promised they would. Or they forget your anniversary. Or they forget to call you from their hotel room. Rage. Shouting and screaming to get you to back down if you object somehow to the narcissist's bizarre behavior. The victim card. This is one of the major strategies. Narcissists are capable of some degree of self-pity, and they can play victim with the best of them. I knew nobody would want me on their team. Of course, why would a bore like myself expect anything else? I'll go alone then. I suppose. Rationalization. This is a common defense mechanism, only applied deliberately in this context. It involves giving logical reasons for illogical actions. For example, "I'm sorry I hit you. I just got so mad when you provoked me." Or, "I know I shouldn't drive when I've been drinking, but I wanted so badly to get back home to you quickly." Flattery. Does this one need an explanation? We all know how having somebody express appreciation for our looks, intelligence, or taste can make us feel. It's not lost on narcissists either. 12. Who is in danger of falling victim to a narcissist? Out of your vulnerabilities will come your strength. Sigmund Freud. People who complain about the state of the world, or how they are the victims of tragic circumstances that have kept them from getting the exact job they want, or their long commute to work, or the fact that the local coffee shop didn't have their favorite brand of oat milk, have one thing in common. They've probably never been victimized by a narcissist, a psychopath, or a sociopath. They simply don't know what they're talking about. Narcissists are able to fix their sights on anybody who possesses a particular human ability, empathy. It doesn't matter if you're beautiful, rich, competent, successful, well-liked, popular, funny, or mentally strong. A narcissist could still deceive you completely. They use the same methods as psychopaths to ensnare people. Love bombing is just one of them, and it even works on coworkers, although, of course, the application will differ. People like this use manipulation techniques you could never come up with in 100 years. Countless mental coaches, psychiatrists, psychologists, and therapists who don't specialize in this particular field are duped by narcissists and psychopaths every week. People with a strong sense of empathy are some of their favorite targets because these people are always prepared to open their arms to anybody who looks like they could use a little help. Narcissists are skilled at playing the victim, even when they are actually the aggressors. It's a bit like a wolf calling for help after spotting a sheep. I've combed the available literature for any correlation with the intelligence levels of the victims. There are no obvious connections. Intelligence appears to offer no protection against manipulation. Instinctively, my theory would have to be that being smarter actually makes you more vulnerable. It's not a very comforting thought. Why would that be the case, though? The greater your intelligence, the more you are able to think rationally. Psychology studies have shown this. It's not that you can disassociate yourself from your emotions, but rather that you rely more on logic when observing other people's behavior. You look at what they do and think that there must be a logical explanation for their strange behavior. You base your interpretations on yourself. I think we all do this. It's not a very useful strategy for dealing with narcissists, though. Whether you're susceptible to the manipulations of narcissists or not depends rather on your degree of vulnerability, which has nothing at all to do with your intelligence. This could be caused by past traumas you've suffered and may even have forgotten about. Unfortunately, there are lots of stereotypes about victims. A common misconception, for example, is that female victims of domestic violence are somehow the same. It's often assumed that they have poor self-esteem and possibly lack employment. However, this simply isn't true. In fact, women with good self-esteem who are employed are more likely to be victimized by a domestic abuser. They could be as smart, successful, and talented as you like. None of that protects them from jerks or narcissists. On the contrary, it could actually trigger violent responses in narcissists who can't tolerate being questioned. There can only be one winner in a relationship like this, and it will always be the narcissist. The most dangerous thought you can have is this: nobody could ever manipulate me. Nobody could entangle me in a web of lies and strange behavior. I'd see it coming a mile away. No, forget all that stuff. I used to think like that, and I turned out to be painfully wrong. You have no idea what it ended up costing me. Narcissists don't seek us out because we're like them. They seek us out because we are their opposites. We are empathic, and we want the best for others. Our hearts, if you will, are too big. We feel compassion for the weak. We possess emotional intelligence, and we have genuine confidence, which the narcissists can't emulate. One of my favorite examples is that of world-renowned psychologist and psychopathy expert David Hare, who managed to have the wool pulled over his eyes in prison by a psychopath he had diagnosed personally. What the guy said sounded so good, though. Another researcher lent his Mercedes to a narcissist who had just been released from prison and never saw his car again. How is this possible, you might wonder? Well, this is just what narcissists do. Can your behavioral profile tell you if you could become a victim? Things would be a lot simpler if all we needed to concern ourselves with was the mischief that narcissists get up to. However, the problem is a lot more complicated than that, as you know. A narcissist is able to manipulate and deceive a great variety of people, and there is no particular type that is always safe, especially not in a relationship context. When emotions, which are in many ways opposed to logic, enter the picture, things can go sideways in no time. Even though nobody is immune to manipulation, we probably all have slightly different weaknesses to address. Let's take a look at the kinds of thing a narcissist might consider when selecting a victim. Your weaknesses. Just like psychopaths, narcissists are on the lookout for your weaknesses. They are essentially cowards, and so they tend to prefer victims who are weaker than average. Now, strength is not a watertight protection. Here, there are plenty of highly motivated psychopaths who have torn the strongest people you could imagine to shreds. But in any case, you're far more likely to run afoul of somebody who wants to manipulate you if you're somewhat the worse for wear emotionally. There is a difference between narcissists and psychopaths that's hard to define precisely. Although both of them are habitual manipulators, psychopaths are without a doubt more dangerous. They see life as a game and themselves as masters of it. They could cause a world of trouble for others just to stave off a moment's boredom. All other humans are perishable assets in the deliberations of a psychopath. Narcissists are more likely to be aware that what they are doing is probably wrong, but as they feel entitled to the best of everything, they do it anyway. I wouldn't go so far as to say a narcissist is particularly troubled by pangs of conscience, but they are at least more human in outlook than psychopaths. Psychopaths are a lot more cunning too. They are always looking for an angle to get the upper hand on somebody. The world is just a buffet to them, and they feel entitled to help themselves to anything they want. In comparison, narcissists seem more like overgrown toddlers, flailing at the floor when they don't get their way, while psychopaths are always learning in every situation, always refining their techniques. Psychopaths also seem, although this is hard to prove, to be a lot more ruthless. They can set their mind on avenging some slight or another and proceed to do anything in their power to destroy another person utterly. What others might think matters less to a psychopath, while narcissists will be constantly considering the image other people have of them. It's all a bit complicated, and as I've pointed out in the past, there's no sharp boundary between these two disorders. Since narcissism can be highly preoccupied with an individual's emotions, it might be interesting to take a brief look at how the different colors might respond to different situations. Here, the stereotype is that yellows wear their emotions on their sleeves and can't hide anything they feel, while greens are the exact opposite. They actively seek to conceal their emotions at all times. Blues are assumed to have hardly any emotions at all and mostly present as stone-faced, and reds tend to experience just a single emotion, rage. Apart from being rich in generalization, these observations also have a nugget of truth to them. The charts on the following page provide some examples of how this can manifest. How likely are reds to fall victim to a narcissist? Reds are strong and forceful and don't take crap from anyone. They believe in instant payback. Tough, gnarly, competitive types who enjoy a good tussle. How could anybody ever get to them? Now, reds aren't constantly arguing with everyone around them, but if you need to get a red to do something they don't want to, you'll have a conflict on your hands. How does the narcissist react? By caring less than most people do. They see the angry face, they hear the angry words, and the aggressive insults aren't lost on them. However, their main concern will still be whatever it is they want. There are countless examples of narcissists successfully redirecting a red's anger in ways that benefited them personally. The troublesome weaknesses of reds: boorish, arrogant, aggressive, steamrollers, bad listeners, rushed, commanding, controlling, intolerant, and egotistical. The narcissist's best approach here is to dare to do the unexpected. People often keep their heads down a little around reds. So, what do you think might happen if they came across somebody who didn't? Only somebody who is prepared to take on some serious risk would do that. Psychopaths are the masters of this, but narcissists are also able to do it. For example, it might seem suicidal to head into the office of a boss who is known to detest bootlickers and immediately proceed to praise them to the skies. However, this is all just a game to a narcissist. That's the part that reds have a hard time understanding. They can be taken in completely by somebody who fails to register the danger. Narcissists radiate confidence. Reds are good at detecting confidence and tend to respect it. Sometimes. They will even feel a certain admiration for it. What works on Reds is praising them, subtly though, don't forget that, for something they are more often criticized for. For example, many Reds are constantly being told how insensitive they are. While some Reds might be amused that people are scared of them, they're just like everyone else. Really, they want very badly to be liked and respected just as they are. The difference is just in the way they show it. So, when somebody dares to show appreciation for these particular characteristics, it hits home. Conclusions. The thing with Reds is you can't do anything too openly. That's why. Skilled manipulators prefer a more indirect approach. The narcissist method for winning the trust of a Red is simply to show nerve. As I mentioned earlier, narcissists aren't as troubled by situations like having to lie through their teeth to their boss's boss as you or I would be. Reds also tend to avoid asking for help. They try to solve the problem on their own first. This is great news for ambitious manipulators, as this means they will be able to feed their victims more and more of their medicine over a prolonged period of time until the Red finally goes to someone else for help. How likely are Yellows to fall victim to a narcissist? The weakness of Yellows, to a great extent, is their aversion to talking about weaknesses. It's a big downer, and people get way too negative about this stuff. Yellows are typical relationship-oriented people. They want to be surrounded by people whenever possible. The downside of this is the dependence on others it entails. Without other people, Yellows grow bored or run out of ideas. They can't speak to, joke with, or laugh with others, and they can't refer to the people around them. This is the key to a Yellow's vulnerability, social isolation, perhaps the worst fate known to man. Any driven narcissist who is looking to manipulate a Yellow will begin their efforts by ensuring the Yellow is isolated from the outside world. The narcissist makes a point of cutting the Yellow off from their friends, family, and work-related social events. After-hours workplace get-togethers are out of the question. Bit by bit, the victim's contacts are eliminated, and the victim is thus brought closer to the narcissist, step by step. If the victim has nobody to talk to, the narcissist will be quick to be the only person who listens to them. Somebody who actually appreciates the Yellow, despite all their obvious flaws and weaknesses. The narcissist will put themselves forward as the only person who even cares. As a result, they will become so much more important to the victim. But how does the narcissist pull it off? It's devastating in its simplicity. They exploit the Yellow's weaknesses and turn them against them. So let's take a look at these weaknesses of Yellows. The sad shortcomings of Yellows. Selfish, superficial, egocentric, excessively confident, all talk and no action, lacking in focus, messy, forgetful, irritable, sensitive, disorganized and chaotic, giggly and lighthearted, talks too much and for too long, terrible listener. It doesn't matter how much pain it causes a Yellow to be reminded of these things. The narcissist wants to get their way. For example, a deceptive, manipulative narcissist might tell the victim in confidence that somebody they care about a great deal said something very unpleasant about them. Maybe their best friend even. A stab in the back. Yellows are particularly sensitive about relationships breaking down. This brings them stress and disrupts their balance. Keeping them out of balance after this involves planting tiny, tiny seeds of doubt in themselves and in their abilities, or perhaps their popularity. Comments like, "Why do you talk about yourself all the time?" are simply met with confusion. If anybody is talking about themselves, it's the narcissist, of course. Sure, a certain degree of self-centeredness is part of the Yellow package. However, a narcissist will make a point of guilt-tripping you over it. They will keep pointing out how egotistical the Yellow is. Quite soon, the Yellow will stop daydreaming and being creative and be well on their way to disaster instead. There are other ways to break a Yellow, too. Constantly mentioning how they really ought to take things more seriously, not laugh so much, and not joke around all the time. Just be serious, for once. The narcissist can feign personal insult over practically every joke a Yellow cracks. Any joke will become inappropriate, even insensitive. How could you? Their sense of humor, which is essential to Yellows, breaks down and fades away. People will stop recognizing them and will increasingly seek to distance themselves from them. They've become so introverted and weird. Conclusions, isolation. Give up the childish nonsense. Don't play around so much. Give me more attention. Much more. If you don't, I'll leave you. This catches the yellow in a trap. There are plenty of individuals who make more or less subtle attempts at separating their significant other from their old friends. Jealousy is often a factor here, of course. This is not okay. If somebody tries to control you should take a step back and ask yourself why they are behaving as they are. This kind of influence needs to be questioned immediately. And of course, not everybody who uses this method is a narcissist. How likely are greens to fall victim to a narcissist? The main weakness of greens is their tendency to shy away from conflict. Conflict is uncomfortable at best. Only troublemakers get involved in that kind of thing, and uncomfortable truths are troublesome to a green. Greens are change averse, particularly when it comes to changes that are rushed. Being the center of attention is dreadful, as is public censure. They don't even really want public praise. They're introverted and something of an observer type. It can be hard to get a straight answer out of them, even to the most direct of questions. Hearing a green say yes when they mean no is a common occurrence. Which of these weaknesses are greens aware of? All of them, I'd say. Greens tend to be quite self-critical. Greens and their weaknesses: conflict averse, impractical, change averse, stubborn, grumpy, buttoned up, cowardly, passive, evasive, irresponsible, dishonest, talking about people instead of talking to them, overly sensitive of criticism, and indecisive. If a narcissist is trying to sink their claws into a green person, they will tend to target the green's sensitivity to criticism and aversion to conflict. An insensitive comment can get a great deal of work done here. Let's take a look at a personal relationship. A green person will not uncommonly know that they are somewhat slow to act and lack initiative. In a relationship with an equally green partner, they would tend to stay at home, leaving their dreams to be just that. Paradoxically enough, this leads us on to red behavior, a strong personality who acts with clarity and intention in every situation. A red who is in a good mood can achieve an incredible amount in a very brief time. Building a fence or painting a garage takes them hardly any time at all. Of course, this example is quite simplified, but I'm sure you understand the principle. The way to get to a green can be to exhibit red behavior. Since greens like to get out of having to make difficult decisions, they will be happy to delegate all their decisions to others. Once a narcissist has won the trust of a green and managed to get close to them, they'll be ready to get to work manipulating their victim, turning people's strengths against them. Greens don't exactly have inflated egos. They're more likely to put themselves down and keep pointing out how badly they suck to themselves and anybody else prepared to listen. All a narcissist needs to do here is reinforce that. Let's say a green woman complains to the mirror about the weight she has put on. Any man knows that this question is a veritable death trap. But if you're actually interested in keeping your significant other down, just agree with them. Yes, I think you might have put a little weight on. The victim's self-esteem, already fragile, takes another knock. Cooking then, was this sauce really as good as it could have been? Couldn't it have been spicier, less thick, or warmer, or colder? It doesn't take much to keep a green guessing. If they object at any point, all the narcissist needs to do is raise their voice a smidge. One loud argument every week should be enough to keep your green compliant indefinitely. How likely are blues to fall victim to a narcissist? During my past research into psychopathy, I concluded that blues might be the hardest people of all to manipulate. Blues recall what you've said in the past, and they have a good sense for details. They take notes, save emails and text messages, and know how stuff works. At this point, you know that narcissists often lie just for the sake of it, and they always have new lies ready in case they get caught out and need to muddy the issue. Naturally, narcissists won't be able to resist trying to dupe a blue. Things will soon get challenging, however. Blue coworkers or bosses or friends or partners are always the quickest to see through a lie. This is because they remember exactly what they were told last time around. If a narcissist wants to manipulate a blue to gain some advantage or another, it's going to take some work. Loudly announcing that it's actually, like this isn't going to get the narcissist far. Blues look stuff up. Rational and naturally inquisitive as they are, They will simply march back to the office narcissist and point out the error. How does the narcissist get out of this? In a relationship, you can't simply say, "I paid for the couch," or "Your share is $800. A blue partner or friend will ask for the receipt. This isn't necessarily because of some suspicion they're harboring. They just want to see the receipt. You can't treat a blue any old way and expect to get away with it. Many people study up on certain subjects, at least enough to be able to, seem like they know what they're talking about and make people listen. Blues, however, go all in on everything. One of their most noteworthy traits is their inability to let things lie. They have to dig into things and find out how everything works. Sometimes this can be annoying to others, but in this specific context, it's definitely to their advantage. Note that blues won't necessarily make too much of the narcissist's antics. They have no need to tell the world how they feel. Deep down, however, their minds are made up. There's no trusting that person at the end of the hall, and that's something that will be factored into every decision going forward. So, does this mean blues are immune to manipulation? Unfortunately, it's not quite that simple. The frustrating flaws of blues: evasive, sullen and glum, suspicious, picky, whiny, impossible to satisfy, sticklers for procedure, indecisive, buttoned up, dispassionate, socially inept, sluggish, etc. Blues have weaknesses too. Usually, narcissists try to identify these weaknesses in order to exploit them. It's going to take time. The manipulator understands that it's imperative to tread lightly. One way of making people distrust a blue is to eliminate the blue's credibility. This is achievable too by convincing everybody else that the blue has become careless. Narcissists know better though. They will set their charm to work, gathering a group of allies to do the narcissist's bidding. These allies will be comprehensively manipulated and will consistently maintain that the narcissist is the most amazing person in the world. Each time the narcissist is criticized, these unwitting pawns will come to their aid, making the source of the criticism, the blue, in this case, seem grouchy and difficult. If you remove every opportunity to point out any mistakes you've made, you might be able to get them to doubt themselves in the end. The fact that their colleagues are declaring their allegiance like this won't alarm the blue as such, but if they are denied the opportunity to do quality work, the blues will suffer a blow to their confidence. Conclusions. It's probably much easier for an attractive female narcissist to deceive a blue who has weaker relationship skills. This is a pretty basic example, and I know how outdated it can sound in 2022, but I think you know what I'm getting at. Imagine a man who has yet to meet the one. Suddenly, a beautiful woman is pledging her love to him. She is giving him every kind of attention and emphasizing all his strengths. He's never experienced anything like this before, so he's incredibly vulnerable to her advances. But this can go both ways. A charming narcissistic partner is hard for anyone to resist. Blues may be less dependent on personal relationships than most, but they still tend to form very close private bonds to the people they do engage with. 13. How are narcissists made? An abnormal reaction to. An abnormal situation would be normal behavior. Viktor Frankl. A reasonable question to ask at this point is how somebody actually becomes a narcissist. Is it innate or learned behavior? It's an interesting question, particularly when viewed in the light of psychopathy. Psychopathy is a personality disorder that more or less encompasses everything that's part of narcissism and combines it with an additional set of even less appealing characteristics. The question of how an individual becomes a psychopath appears to have been resolved by science at this point. I say appears because consensus, as is so commonly the case in the field of psychology, has yet to be reached on the issue of psychopathy. There are still some psychologists who claim that psychopathy ought to be treatable, but we'll have to think of this as more of a theoretical assumption. Nobody has so far managed to explain how it could be done. However, not all people who behave like psychopaths actually are psychopaths. Some of them are sociopaths. Sociopaths are more or less the same as psychopaths in terms of actual behavior. They are also manipulative, unempathic liars who wouldn't think twice about doing anything to get what they want. As I've established by now, they are not pleasant to be around. However, psychopaths were born with their disorder, as MRI scans of their brains have revealed. The amygdala, that is, the emotional center of The brain is less developed than in normal individuals. Sociopaths, on the other hand, have been shaped by their environment, hence the term sociopath, which explicitly refers to the society around the individual, by making people endure long, difficult childhoods, often rife with abuse at the hand of their caregivers. You can produce people with stunted empathy and emotions. For example, this is how child soldiers are trained. By nature, children know nothing about killing people, but with guidance and a gradual increase of the pressure, their natural compassion can be removed. This is a dreadful procedure, but that doesn't prevent it from happening in several parts of the world. Those places are practically sociopathy plants. Children who grow up in bad enough conditions can turn into emotionally numb automatons. The process of restoring them to the people they could have been is a difficult process that succeeds far too rarely. In the world of science, there is pretty much a consensus on this. About 50% of an individual's attributes depend on their genes, their nature. This has been tested for more than a century through experiments involving pairs of twins, which as far as I can tell have covered every imaginable human trait. Statistically, this suggests that narcissism is half dependent on genes. The rest is a result of the treatment one receives. Growing up, and there are thousands of different contributing factors to take into consideration. This is a massive area of inquiry, but I'd like to spend some time now focusing on the nurture part of the equation. My question for this chapter is this: can a narcissist be created like a sociopath can? I suspect this to be the case. Fortunately, it is rare for parents to set out to deliberately turn a child who has previously displayed few, if any, narcissistic tendencies into a full-on narcissist. But their treatment of the child is bound to have consequences. There are several competing theories regarding how narcissism arises within an individual. In general terms, it comes down to either nature or nurture, or a combination of the two. However, we lack any precise knowledge of how the phenomenon is produced. There are some clues. Many researchers in the field of antisocial personality disorders agree that there are some specific risk factors that will contribute to a child's development of NPD. Some studies suggest that children who grow up to become narcissists are often the children of narcissists. Other studies have failed to find any strong correlations. However, the children of highly successful children are also at greater risk, particularly if they lack the talents that made their parents so successful. And of course, pampered children from well-to-do families. Oops. I realize that this whole thing can seem a bit sinister, but if you do observe tendencies along these lines, you do well to pay attention to them. It's undeniable that parents influence their children. The question is simply how much and in what ways. Of course, having a child go through a variety of trauma, such as contentious divorces or parents using the child to get back at each other, which is quite common, can cause its share of problems. Different kinds of childhood trauma could cause a child to shut down their empathic abilities. Their aim in doing this is self-defense, and they probably don't do it consciously. Psychologists refer to this as a narcissistic injury. Perhaps it's not that surprising that children can be traumatized by bad living conditions. But this is still only half the equation. The second, more complicated, and, I presume, less digestible part is related to the most recent theories about what might happen to children who are overvalued and excessively cherished by their parents. Parents who, with the best of intentions, allow their children to stay children until they're well past an appropriate age. These parents might be of the opinion that their particular child is God's gift to creation, even if there is no evidence at all that their child possesses any remarkable abilities in comparison to others. Systematic overvaluation, as opposed to derogation, might very well cause a spoiled child to develop an excessive sense of entitlement to all the good things in life, and will rarely help them learn to be considerate of